Has Matt Hancock been betrayed? And the great British countryside, lush meadows, rolling hills, glorious landscapes. But did you know that it's actually racist? That's right. People think too many white people live in rural Britain and something must be done about that. I am debating, believe it or not, is the countryside racist? And political correctness is a gift to Islamist terrorism. That is according to Home Secretary Suella Braverman. On a similar note, I will be reacting to the Manchester Arena bombing inquiry, which has found the sick, twisted terrorist could potentially have been stopped. But who is really to blame? OK, is it MI5, our security services, or the bomber's own family? Get your emails coming in, thick and fast, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Do you think that Matt Hancock was betrayed? And, crucially, is the countryside racist? gbviews@gbnews.uk. But first, it's the latest headlines with Rhiannon Jones.
Thank you, Patrick. Good afternoon. It's 2 minutes past 3. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. An inquiry into the Manchester Arena terror attack has found MI5 missed opportunities that might have prevented the bombing. The report found the security service failed to act on significant intelligence received in the months before the 2017 attack. Information relating to suicide bomber Salman Abedi was assessed at the time as not terror-related. It also found Abedi could have been arrested at Manchester Airport 4 days before he went on to kill 22 people at the Ariana Grande concert. The Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, says she's committed to working with MI5 and will do everything possible to prevent another attack. The chairman of the inquiry, Sir John Saunders, outlined his findings of this third and final report.
I have found a significant missed opportunity to take action that might have prevented the attack. There was a realistic possibility that actionable intelligence could have been obtained which might have led to action preventing the attack. The reasons for this missed opportunity included a failure by the security service, in my view, to act swiftly enough.
And in the last few minutes, the victims' families have spoken out. They say they've been failed at every level.
It is clear that Salman Abedi should have been referred to prevent. It is clear that the education system needs to be more vigilant in picking up signs of radicalisation. It is clear that Didsbury Mosque turned a blind eye to extremism in its midst. Sir John's report today contains many lessons. We must heed every one of them and make the necessary changes urgently.
Police investigating the death of a missing baby who was found in Brighton last night say the newborn may have been dead for some time. The remains were found in woodland close to where Constance Martin and Mark Gordon were arrested on Monday. The couple had evaded authorities for more than 7 weeks and refused to give any information on the location or welfare of their baby. They're currently being held on suspicion of child neglect manslaughter.
At this stage, we have not yet been able to confirm the baby's gender, and a post-mortem examination has not yet taken place. Despite this, based on our inquiries we've carried out so far, we believe, sadly, the baby may have been dead for some time before they were found. It's too early for us to provide a more specific date.
Boris Johnson has expressed concerns over Rishi Sunak's new Brexit deal for Northern Ireland. Speaking in Westminster earlier, the former Prime Minister said he'd find it very difficult to vote for the Windsor deal, saying it wasn't about the UK taking back control. The deal with the EU aims to fix post-Brexit trade problems in Northern Ireland. Boris Johnson also admitted he'd made mistakes in signing his Northern Ireland protocol that caused the DUP to walk out of power sharing.
I find it very difficult to vote for something like this myself, because I believed that we should have done something different. No matter how much plaster came off the ceiling in Brussels. And I hope that it will work. And I also hope that if it doesn't work, we will have the guts to deploy that bill again.
Matt Hancock says he's a victim of a massive betrayal after more than 100,000 of his WhatsApp messages were leaked. The former Health Secretary handed over his text to journalist Isabel Oakeshott as they collaborated on his memoirs. She then passed them on to The Telegraph. The paper claims Mr Hancock clashed with then Education Secretary Sir Gavin Williamson over schools during the COVID pandemic. Hancock reportedly said he was mounting rearguard action to close schools in December 2020. That's despite Sir Gavin fighting tooth and nail to keep them open. And teachers in Wales and the south of England are on strike today in a dispute over pay. It's the third walkout by members of the National Education Union this week, with previous industrial action taking place in the north of England and the Midlands. The Education Secretary had invited teaching unions to take part in talks on the condition that the strikes were suspended. But the unions are demanding a better pay offer first. Further national strikes in England and Wales are planned for March the 15th and 16th. This is GB News. We're bringing more as it happens now, though. It's back to Patrick.
OK, people, let's start with the latest revelations from what's been called the lockdown files. And, well, they show no sign of stopping, do they? Because yesterday it was Matt Hancock's decisions on care homes which were under the microscope. So that's the elderly sorted, in a way. And today it's the turn of schools. So kids, he's working himself across the age ranges, isn't he? Leaked messages reveal how Hancock thought the then Education Secretary Gavin Williamson was, and I quote, mad in fighting to keep schools open, all whilst Hancock was otherwise occupied making a disparaging comment about teaching unions, and we will be debating that a little bit later on in the show. Lots of different angles for us to go at on this particular topic today. We will be looking at whether or not Matt Hancock has been betrayed. I know, yes, but has he? Actually, seriously, was he sending all this stuff over there in confidence? Has there been an actual betrayal here? Also, as well, of course, whether or not teaching unions are indeed that word that I'm not allowed to say on national television, and lazy and don't enjoy working. But let's deal with the political stuff first, shall we, with, who better, our political reporter, Catherine Forster, who is in Westminster. Catherine, thank you very much. Nice to see you on a sunny day for a change. You can pop the GB News brolly away. So what is the latest when it comes to the Hancock-Williamson infighting and what impact that might have had, frankly, on children's education?
Yes, the attention today has turned to education, hasn't it? And of course, many, many people feel that children had an incredibly raw deal during COVID, during the lockdowns. There were 2 lockdowns that closed schools completely for many, many months. Exams were cancelled. We know that the damage that was done to children's education and indeed to their mental health. The Children's Commissioner today has been saying that throughout the pandemic, children were an afterthought, and really these messages paint a picture of the rows, the infighting behind the scenes. Now, we were always told, weren't we, that the government was following the science, but it wasn't as simple as that. And behind the scenes, the beleaguered Education Secretary Gavin Williamson was in fact fighting to keep schools open, both wanting to send them back quicker after the first lockdown. Matt Hancock, the Health Secretary, said no, and then to stop them going into a second lockdown in January 2021. Now, apparently Matt Hancock wanted the schools closed back in that December, won the battle of wills with Boris Johnson at the time, and then you remember the ridiculous situation at the beginning of January 2021. Schools went back literally for about a day, and then they announced that schools were being closed again. Gavin Williamson thought very seriously about resigning, but ultimately didn't hold enough sway. And of course, damaging allegations for him as well, these messages where he's been very disparaging about teachers and unions basically being rather work shy. Now, he has come out and said, no, I was talking about the unions. Of course, I understand that teachers work incredibly hard. The Prime Minister's spokesman also keen to say, the Prime Minister values teachers. But of course, this will have upset many teachers, and the teaching unions think that this is appalling. But Gavin Williamson's own wife is a primary school teacher.
Well, yes, indeed. I imagine that made for some rather awkward dinner conversation, because presumably she's in a union as well. So there we go. But look, Catherine, thank you very, very much. Catherine Forster, our political reporter in Westminster, whizzing you through the political angle. Now, what is interesting really here is people can argue until the cows come home about whether or not we were right to shut schools and keep them shut for as long as we did, then open them, then shut them again, and how effective that came to be when it came to stopping transmission. So were kids little petri dishes of the coronavirus that would then go home and bring that to mum and dad and grandma and granddad and help with the spread? Or should it have been allowed to let rip, the kids get it, then they become in some way immune to it or less likely to get it? But the concern, I think, for lots of people should be whether or not government policy was being driven by political infighting. So was it the fact that Matt Hancock and Gavin Williamson disagreed with something, they were on some kind of epic power trip, and as a result of that, kids were left to stay at home, mental health suffered, their linguistic skills suffered, and then also a lot of them as well, remember, they didn't take their exams. Those exam results, I think, were squiffy to say the least. Some of them were quite inflated, according to some reports. It does also come on the back of something that dropped just before we came on air, and we're going to be talking about this later in the show, and this is potentially very important, which is about that second lockdown and whether or not actually the real reason why we decided to continue and go ahead with a second lockdown was based on the fact that they thought that public opinion wanted it, not scientific data. And that, I think, will get a lot of people very angry. But we'll touch on that later, because joining me now is the Head of Education at the Centre for Policy Studies and a former teacher, Mark Lehane. Mark, thank you very, very much. Great to have you in the studio. I've got to ask, are teaching unions lazy and a word I'm not allowed to say on television at this moment in time?
No, I don't think they are. But what I would say is I don't think any of us, you, me, if you were to go through all of our messages on our phone, we may occasionally have said something between friends or colleagues that's maybe not as diplomatic as it would be if we were talking to other people. OK. Now, do you think that actually teaching unions saw in some way the coronavirus as an opportunity to stay at home and get their members to stay at home and do less work? No, I don't think that. I mean, there is some data out there that shows quite a significant proportion of youngsters didn't actually have a lot of work set or a lot of interactions with their teachers during the first lockdown. So I'm thinking April, May of 2020, and there's no doubt that had an impact on them. For me, I was very disappointed as a former teacher to see some of the trade unions work really hard to try and prevent schools opening in the summer of 2020. It felt like whenever the government met their demands, they came up with new demands about mitigation. But that's kind of what they're saying, and that's really the point I'm getting at, which is that did happen, didn't it? And that leads me to wonder whether or not actually they really did want the schools closed. No, I think being fair, because we can't see inside the souls of Mary Bowsett and Kevin Courtney, who run the NEU, who were some of the biggest problems at the time, I think they were trying to look after their members' concerns and their members' interests. And lots of people were worried about going back to school. Now, we know now that teachers are actually less likely than the typical member of the public to get COVID and get really ill from it. OK, but we didn't know that at the time. We didn't have vaccines then, which we do now. So I think it's very easy to forget quite how scared we all felt back at the time, and there's just the stuff that we didn't know that we now know about COVID. Yes, well, as ever, I think it's time now for us all to please think of the children. And so the children did suffer as a result. Mental health being locked in. I'm definitely not going to hold, by the way, government policy responsible for this, but an unfortunate consequence of keeping people at home meant that some children were trapped in with their abusers, etc. Now, that is an unfortunate byproduct. There's absolutely no way whatsoever. I think we can all agree that the government or unions wanted anything like that to happen, but it was an unfortunate byproduct of this. So there was that. There's also reports that have come out that children struggled with early years development, so talking, walking. And when we looked at it in that context, we could all see that coming, couldn't we? And should we have kept the schools open? Well, again, with the benefit of hindsight, I think most people would say that if there was another situation like this, we would be even more loath to close schools than they were back at the time. What I think is interesting is in the early days of the pandemic, there were so many things we didn't know about. And I think it's only fair to say that it's hard to make really good evidence-informed decisions in the government at the best of times. But when this, unprecedented global pandemic kicked off, it was the worst of times to try and get hold of accurate information in a timely fashion. And the other thing I would say is there were very few voices back in March 2020 arguing for the government to go a bit slower, take a bit more caution, because when it looked like we were going to be a bit like Sweden, the government came under massive criticism. We couldn't possibly be like Sweden, could we? No, that would be absolutely terrible. It's interesting that you've raised that about there not being a huge amount of public appetite for that, because something that has just
come our way anyway, the latest round of this cache of lockdown files, as it's being called, is that, and I'm just reading now, Britain's second lockdown was based on, quote, very wrong COVID data. Boris Johnson feared that. And if you just delve into this, Boris was worried that he blinked too soon on a second national lockdown on the basis that scientists, reportedly, allegedly, warned him that their data was very wrong. So all of a sudden here, it's back into the realms of flawed data, isn't it, and whether or not we should have responded to that. But crucially, to your point, Boris Johnson apparently was warned not to row back on the idea for a second national lockdown because that is too far ahead of public opinion. So all of a sudden, we're building a picture here of lockdown policies based not on scientific facts, really, and led by public opinion, which is no real way to damage economy and people's lives, is it?
Well, let's put it a different way. Imagine if we had ministers or a prime minister running the country that didn't take into account where the public were on things. One of the things I think we made a mistake of in the pandemic is people would often talk about the science. We have to follow the science. And sadly, the science is rarely clear, and often you get conflicting advice or information or evidence about what the right or wrong thing to do is. So that's why we do need politicians who we elect to represent us to make those decisions. And so they will, of course, take into account what other politicians are doing, where public opinion appears to be, and, of course, importantly in a democracy, what Parliament would allow.
In light of the fact that we are now having a discussion today about the fact that teachers and their unions, I should say, their unions really got what they wanted, which was schools staying closed, and that has caused a big uproar today. So the schools stayed closed, they got what they wanted in that respect, and now they're out on strike again, telling us all that they deserve a pay rise because of the work that they did during the pandemic. What do you think about that?
Well, I've said it many times. I'm very concerned about the ongoing strikes. I don't think they, in the end, are the right way to resolve things, and I do worry about the impact, not just on children, most importantly, but on the reputation of the profession. You know, teaching is very trusted. I do think the teachers and others did a superb job, generally, during the pandemic, keeping an eye on children, teaching them the best they could. I'm worried the strikes aren't the right thing to do. But let's not mix up the pandemic with the strikes now. We're in a different place. I just hope we can all get together and find a way through it.
Look, thank you very much. As ever, great to have you on the show. Mark Lehane there, who is the Head of Education at the Centre for Policy Studies and a former teacher, reacting to that news that potentially schools were closed due to some kind of infighting and power struggle between Matt Hancock and Gavin Williamson. There was also some rather disparaging comments, which we're going to be debating later, when apparently I'm allowed to say the naughty word, about them not being particularly nice and being equated to lazy human backsides. So there we go. But Matt Hancock has released a statement, and we can bring you part of that now, you lucky people. He said, "I am hugely disappointed and sad at the massive betrayal and breach of trust by Isabel Oakeshott. There is absolutely no public interest case for this huge breach. All the materials for the book have already been made available to the inquiry, which is the right and only place for everything to be considered properly and the right lessons to be learned. As we have seen, releasing them in this way gives a partial, biased account to suit an anti-lockdown agenda." So there we go. And on that note, later on, I am going to be discussing whether or not Matt Hancock has been betrayed here. GBviews at gbnews.uk. I want your views on that. I'll go to the inbox shortly. But very different matters now, ladies and gentlemen. Very important matters, this, because in the last hour, the third and final report into the Manchester Arena bombing has been released. And the inquiry found that the attack might have been prevented if MI5 had acted on key intelligence received in the months before the attack, i.e. they could quite possibly have stopped the bomber. Let's cross live now to our GB News North West reporter. It's Sophie Reaper, who was actually at that inquiry on the scene. Look, thank you. Just fill us in, bring us up to date on what was said, because it went on for quite a while. So what happened?
Well, we heard the inquiry from Sir John Saunders, and then in the last few moments we've been hearing some statements from various family members. First, there was a statement on behalf of the families of Chloe Rutherford and Liam Curry, the couple that were killed in the Arena attack. They said things like, "Forgiveness will never be enough for such evil, and we will always believe you all played a part in the murder of our children." We then heard a statement read out on behalf of 11 of the families who lost loved ones in the attack. attack. They said they trust the recommendations that Sir John Saunders has made will be implemented. They said that their loved ones had every right to feel safe and protected, but they were failed at every level. They also did pay tribute to Sir John Saunders and the thoroughness of his report. Of course, as we say, in the last hour, he has published the third and final volume of the Manchester Arena inquiry that he's been carrying out. He spoke on radicalisation, preparation of Salman Abedi, and a key point that he made was that although there was no certainty to it, if MI5 had acted on key intelligence that they'd received in the months before the attack, it potentially could have been prevented. Here's what he had to say.
I have found a significant missed opportunity to take action that might have prevented the attack. It is not possible to reach any conclusion on the balance of probabilities or to any other evidential standard as to whether the attack would have been prevented. However, there was a realistic possibility that actionable intelligence could have been obtained which might have led to actions preventing the attack.
Well, since the volume of has been published, by Sir John Saunders, Home Secretary Suella Braverman has come out to say that she's committed to working with bodies such as MI5 in order to implement those recommendations that Sir John Saunders has set out in the third and final volume of his Manchester Arena inquiry. Now, of course, the people most affected here are the families of victims and survivors of the attack who we've been hearing from this afternoon. It's the inquiry is now over, but this remains the reality for those people affected by such a horrendous tragedy.
Sophie, thank you very, very much. Sophie Reaper there, our North West of England reporter who has just been bringing you the latest from the Manchester Arena inquiry, the third round there, isn't it, of that. Now, according to the chairman of the inquiry, the security services were guilty of a significant missed opportunity that might have prevented the bombing. And joining me now to break this down further is former senior military intelligence officer, it's Philip Ingram. Philip, thank you very much. Now, from what I can gather, the question here is whether or not they really should have picked up Abedi on his own by virtue of the way that he was behaving and the kind of individual that he was, but also whether or not they should have looked more closely at his family as well. What's your take on what we found out today?
Well, if you listen to the language of the judge when he read out his criticism of the security service, it's right and proper that it's identified. But he said might, could, possibly, potentially. Intelligence is not an exact game. And what we're trying to do is look back and pick lessons out with 20/20 hindsight after something has happened. But at the time, the intelligence services were asking them to have 20/20 foresight to try and predict what's going to happen in the future. It's a very human activity. And things do go wrong. It is not something that is exact, and things have gone wrong in this case. And I know the security service have looked at everything that's been done even before the inquiries come out, and have made some changes, significant changes to the way they do things.
Can I just ask, there is quite a bit that doesn't appear to add up here, just to the untrained eye. For example, a headline like "Police allowed Manchester Arena bomber's brother to flee the UK" before giving evidence at a public inquiry. And it does lead one to wonder whether or not there is a bigger picture here of Abedi, his brother, potentially being part of some kind of wider intelligence operation, and the public not knowing about that. And maybe we should know about that.
Well, the public don't need to know about any of the intelligence operations, because why? Why do they need to know
Children
about what's going on? At the moment, there are hundreds of active investigations going on today involving counter-terrorism police and the security services. The counter-terrorism police and security services have disrupted 37 late-stage attacks since 2017. And late stage is when someone is going in to actually carry out their attack. The public don't need to know the detail behind all of that, because they're not in a position to do anything about it, and they are in a position to potentially disrupt the security service and the police activity, and therefore terrorists could get away with it. This is not something where it should be openly discussed and debated in the public arena. Our intelligence services are out there to try and protect the public. They do everything they possibly can to do it, but it's a very human activity, and sometimes you get it wrong.
Yeah, now, one of the things that's come out in this latest inquiry is actually about where and how Salman Abedi was radicalised. And in this day and age, we all accept that, you know, you can go on your laptop and whatever, and if you're that way inclined, you can become radicalised. In the case of Shamima Begum as well, people might even think you're a victim. But with Salman Abedi, what was interesting was that the mosque that he attended in the Didsbury area was called into question. And there's quite an interesting comment here, which is by Sir John Saunders, who was reading it out today. He says, "It looked as if the Didsbury Mosque was trying to distance itself from Abedi in a way which I did not accept was accurate." He did also say, though, that he considers it unlikely that Abedi was actually radicalised at that mosque. But I just wonder what your view is when it comes to getting into certain religious communities and buildings that could well be hotbeds of radicalisation. Do we do enough there at source, do you think, or are we a bit afraid of it?
No, I don't think the security services are afraid of it at all. They will go anywhere where they think they can gather the information that's needed to keep us safe. However, what it does bring out is a very important point. And the important point is keeping us safe from terrorism is not just the role of counter-terror police or the security services or anything else. It's a whole society role. So there will have been some people potentially in the mosque who will have had suspicions about him, and they probably didn't raise those suspicions. There's other people in the areas that he was living will have seen him behaving in ways that weren't normal and could have raised suspicions. You know, if people pass the information in, all these little bits come together and will make a more complete picture. And it's the security services getting that complete picture have then got more information to act on. There's lessons for all of us here. And that very piece was subject to a master's degree dissertation by the mother of one of the victims, Fegan Murray. She brought that out in her master's dissertation, saying dealing with terrorism is a whole society issue.
Yes, and it is. I think it doesn't help when certain particular areas, anyway, can have banned speakers or quite fruity literature, to say the least, within their libraries as well. I'm just going to rattle through a couple of the things, bullet points, really, when it comes to some of the findings today that have been announced. There was a significant missed opportunity to take action that might have prevented this terror attack. There was a realistic possibility that actionable intelligence could have been obtained, which might have stopped it. So, again, some of these words that you're saying, perhaps, might, etc., and I get that. But one of the things that stands out for me is that the reason for this significant missed opportunity included a failure by an MI5 officer to act swiftly enough. Now, is it a tactic amongst certain intelligence officers to let it run for a period of time, to try to get as much info as you possibly can? And actually, is that what we're looking at here? They let it run too long and 23 people died, including kids.
No, I don't think they were letting this run. I think, having read the criticism bit that's there, what the intelligence officer didn't do was produce a report quickly enough to get his status changed. That would have then put him further up the priority list of where assets are allocated to examine what he's doing, follow him, look at his communications and other things. There are 900 active investigations on today. There are tens of thousands of people in the overall watch list, and there are not the assets. Even if we double the budget for MI5, we would still not have the assets to be able to give the level of surveillance that the public would hope could be given to all of those potential threats. And this is why things are prioritised, and he just didn't hit the right priority level.
There we go. Look, thank you very, very much. And that is, of course, former senior military intelligence officer Philip Ingram. Now, I've just got some info here, some very interesting breaking news, apparently. Should we find out what it is together? Senior civil servant Sue Gray, who led the inquiry into Partygate, has quit the Cabinet Office. And what about this? She's reportedly set to take up a role as Sir Keir Starmer's Chief of Staff. That actually is fascinating because Sue Gray, of course, yes, off of Partygate and that particular inquiry, and quite damning, wasn't it, which led to very top-level resignations, including biffing Boris Johnson, and now she goes and works for the Labour Party. Anyway, later this hour, I will be debating whether or not the countryside is racist. An article in The Guardian, what a surprise, claims the countryside feels like a white middle-class club. Are they right? I'll be talking about that very shortly. Don't move.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel. Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's official. Harry and Meghan are being evicted by the King, and I will look at what that means a little later in this hour. I am also going to be asking the big question of the day, believe it or not, which is the countryside racist? Find out why shortly. We're going toe-to-toe on that. But first, your latest news headlines with the wonderful Rhiannon Jones.
Patrick, thank you. It's 3:34. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. An inquiry into the Manchester Arena terror attack has found MI5 missed opportunities that might have prevented the bombing. The report found the security service failed to act on significant intelligence received in the months before the 2017 attack. Information relating to suicide bomber Salman Abedi was assessed at the time as not terror-related. It also found Abedi could have been arrested at Manchester Airport 4 days before he went on to kill 22 people at the Ariana Grande concert. The Home Secretary says she's committed to working with MI5 and will do everything possible to prevent another attack. The chairman of the inquiry, Sir John Saunders, outlined his findings of this third and final report.
I have found a significant missed opportunity to take action that might have prevented the attack. There was a realistic possibility that actionable intelligence could have been obtained which might have led to action preventing the attack. The reasons for this missed opportunity included a failure by the security service, in my view, to act swiftly enough.
Police investigating the death of a missing baby who was found in Brighton last night say the newborn may have been dead for some time. The remains were found in woodland close to where Constance Martin and Mark Gordon were arrested on Monday. The couple had evaded authorities for more than 7 weeks and refused to give any information on the location or welfare of their baby. They're currently being held on suspicion of child neglect manslaughter. And in the last few minutes, reports are coming in that Sue Gray has been hired as Sir Keir Starmer's Chief of Staff. The senior civil servant led the investigation into Partygate. It's understood she'll resign from her role in the Cabinet Office to take up the position in the Labour Party. And we'll bring you more on that as we get it. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Patrick.
Welcome back, everybody. Now, police today confirmed that they believe the remains of a baby found near Brighton following the arrest of Constance Martin and Mark Gordon may have been dead for some time. We can speak to GB News' national reporter, Theo Tricomba, who is in Brighton. Theo, thank you very much. What's just happened?
Yes, a press conference took place here on this road in Brighton less than an hour ago, where the police who were questioning Constance Martin and Mark Gordon, they did confirm that the baby, which was the remains of a baby which were found in the woodland area just behind me, had been dead for some time, but they haven't yet been able to confirm the gender of the baby following a post-mortem which took place. Now, the couple who'd evaded the police for 53 days, Constance Martin and Mark Gordon, remain in custody. They were arrested on suspicion of gross negligence manslaughter. In that press conference, the police also confirmed that Metropolitan Police officers will remain in this area for some days to come, and Sussex police officers who took part in the large search, that will now be scaled back, but neighbourhood police officers will remain in the area. Now, this area had been cordoned off. The cordon has now been removed. Many specialist officers have begun to leave the area. Particularly forensic officers have just left just a few moments ago. And we also know that flowers have been left at the bottom of this road by people who live in this neighbourhood, leaving messages as well, one including saying rest in peace. And just before the press conference, the police who held that left some flowers there as well. But for now, investigations do remain ongoing.
OK, all right, Theo. Look, thank you very, very much for bringing us that. That's Theo Tricomba there, who's our national reporter, just reacting to some desperately sad news. I'm going to delve into the world of my inbox briefly now, though. GBviews at gbnews.uk. And loads of you have been getting in touch about a couple of our major topics we're talking about today. I do want to ask whether or not you think that Matt Hancock has been actually betrayed by some of this information that's been leaked out there, or is it indeed a vital public service? Those seem to be the two elements of this. And actually, it has divided people. Most people coming down on the side, though, it must be said, of the idea that it's fine that this info's out there. He's the one that betrayed the British public, so now he knows what it feels like. That's from Maureen. Of course, Matt Hancock denies all of this, Maureen. But also the other big one that I wanted to talk to you about, and I'm teasing ahead to a debate that I've got coming your way in just a matter of minutes, which is whether or not the countryside, the British countryside, the rolling hills, the luscious meadows, whether or not it's racist. That's right. We keep seeing articles being written almost exclusively in The Guardian, I must say, about the countryside being like a white middle-class club and that something must be done about that. The last time I checked the census, of course, though, there was a majority white population in Britain, and I dare say a majority white population in rural Britain as well. Not based on racism, just based on human existence. But there we go. We will be debating shortly whether or not the countryside is now racist and what, if anything, can be done about that. Yes, that's right. I have got that cracking debate coming your way in just a couple of minutes. So hold on to your hats, people, because it's probably going to kick right off.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference. And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one.
Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like
Absolutely.
on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, The People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Welcome back. Here's a question for you. Is the countryside racist? It's been claimed that the great British countryside is a white middle-class club and still disenfranchises minorities. A 2017 survey found that only 2% of black people in Britain live in the countryside. So are villages racist, or is it just another example of woke madness now run amok? Joining me to debate this is Femi Nylander and Tim Bonner, who's Chief Executive of the Countryside Alliance, and is, of course, actor and writer, Femi Nylander. Femi, I will start with you. Is the countryside racist?
Well, I think what we need to understand here is that Britain itself has a lot of problems with racism. And when you have areas which have a very, very, very small amount of minorities, sometimes those problems are amplified. If you're a minority growing up in a region where there's barely anyone around you, I mean, one of the things which helps to combat racism is people growing up in diverse areas, people growing up with people who are Muslim, people who are black, people who are white, people who are from everywhere in the world together, and that's one of the things which combats this. When you have areas which, largely because of economic reasons, but also because of the history of migration to this country, have very, very small amounts of minorities, sometimes those minorities can be seen as outsiders a little bit more than in urban areas. People aren't used to them as much. Stop and search rates in part of the countryside were found to be up to 17.5 times higher than white citizens or white people in the area. So it's not that the countryside is like this awful, horrific, racist place. It's that it's harder sometimes as a minority person, to exist in the countryside because of the fact that you've got these imbalances.
All right, Tim, I will bring you into this now. Same question to you. Do you think that the countryside is racist?
No, I don't. But I would agree with a lot that Femi said. There is a historic issue around the fact that the countryside is a very white place, and that's because immigration is mostly into urban areas, and there hasn't been a lot of movement of ethnic minorities into rural communities over the last decades or centuries. But that is
Tim, can I just ask? Sorry, on that. Sorry, Tim. Can I just ask on that?
Racist and suggesting that the countryside is white.
OK, Tim, can I just ask on that? Why is it an issue? You said that there is a historic issue with it being mostly white, but when I look
I think the issue, I think the issue is that, understandably, and I've used comparisons before about, I've travelled a lot around Britain, and you can walk. I can walk into a pub in West Wales where everyone's speaking Welsh as an Englishman, and I have a feeling of other. And I think it is entirely understandable that if you go into a community which is very white, and you're from an ethnic minority, then you are going to have a feeling of other. And Femi's in a better position to talk to me about that. But I think there is a really important point that, just from a practical point of view, the countryside should be looking to encourage people from ethnic minorities to visit, to contribute, to boost the rural economy. And so we should be looking at every possible way of ensuring people feel that they are welcome, whatever their colour, wherever they're from, when they come to the countryside.
All right, Femi, I used to live in the Lake District, so I've spent years there, which is very, very rural, and it's very, very beautiful. And I couldn't see any obvious barriers to anyone from an ethnic minority background wanting to come and enjoy the countryside, other than the fact that most of the people who lived there were white. And I'm just wondering if that makes people feel uncomfortable. Is that not maybe someone else's problem, not the residents of the countryside?
Well, I think this again is something which is larger than just saying, "Oh, these people in the countryside are racist." It's something which comes down to economics a lot of the time as well. If you're an inner city youth in London or even in Manchester, let's say you mentioned the Lake District. Manchester's closer to the Lake District. It has a large Afro-Caribbean population. Going there is one thing, finding the money to go there, to travel there, take the train, this, that, and the rest, visiting. Living in the Lake District, someone who wants to relocate to the Lake District, it's not going to be economically viable for someone living in Moss Side.
There were 3 council estates in Kendal alone when I lived there. 3 council estates in Kendal alone. There is an absolute out-and-out myth, Femi, that every single person who lives in the countryside has got a massive 6-bedroom house. There is a lot of people from low economic backgrounds.
It's Kendal, the Lake District. I mean, you mentioned the Lake District has a very particular, very beautiful part of the like a very specific part. And the truth is that there is a disparity between. Of course, there's always going to be. I mean, I'm not saying everyone in the countryside is wealthy, and that's as you say, that's a myth. Not everyone in the countryside is wealthy, but large swathes of the countryside do have landowners who own a lot of land, who are able to corner this land off to themselves, and who live a life that can only be described as middle class. You don't have the same kind of level of density as you do in urban areas, and because of this, you don't find the same concentration of people who are less well off, and people who are less well off often happen to be people from ethnic minorities. Also, as we know, that, as I said before, the history of migration to the UK, Windrush generation, people came to industrial centres because they were supposed to be working in these industrial centres. People came to Manchester, they came to London, they came to Liverpool, etc.
Yeah.
And so it's just the way that history has panned out.
Okay, all right, Tim, I'll let you come back to that.
Yeah, we're getting involved in some really simple but wrong stereotypes about the countryside here. I mean, some of the poorest wards in Britain, council wards in Britain, you could find in West Cumbria. Cumbria is one of the has some areas of deep deprivation. So the idea somehow that this is it's a sort of middle class area in itself is a lazy urban trope. I personally think, and from all my experiences, this sort of constant line of the sort of the racist yokels in the countryside is equally a really lazy stereotype, a metropolitan stereotype. But as I said, that doesn't mean that there isn't an issue for people from ethnic minorities visiting what are very white communities, and that's a challenge for both sides. I think the people in the countryside need to think really carefully about how they are perceived, and we need to encourage people to understand that they are welcome and that they can enjoy the countryside as much as as everyone else, because it's in everyone's benefit that ethnic minorities do feel that they're welcome. But that feeling that they might have, and the fact that the countryside is largely white, absolutely doesn't mean they're racist. In fact, all the evidence is when the BNP were having electoral success 10, 15 years ago, it was in urban areas that people were voting for them. It was never in rural areas. They weren't being elected onto councils in Suffolk or Hertfordshire. This was racism, and racist political parties have always been urban based in the UK.
Can I just ask,
if I can add something?
Yeah, go on. Yeah.
Could I add something there? I definitely agree as well. As I said before, sometimes you've got that element of people feeling like they're outsiders because of the fact that they're in an area where there's not a lot of ethnic minorities. But just as you've said, sometimes racism itself can be exacerbated by the fact that you have a large minority community and you have people who feel like, oh, they're taking over, they're taking this, that, the rest. If you look at places like Birmingham and this, that, the rest, some very urban areas, the fact that there are large ethnic minority communities has led to a backlash, which itself has. So urban areas are not.
Absolutely. I just want one. I just want one more with you, Femi, if that's all right. I just want one more towards you, just on specifically about the countryside, right? Which is, if people choose to see racism or potential racial connotations anywhere, you could argue they could find it, right? You could see it, as we've just described there, in densely populated urban areas. You could, if you wanted to, maybe see it in a all-white rural country pub in South Wales or somewhere. Do you think that when people come out and write things about, like, how the countryside has got a problem with race, etc., it actually undermines, I would argue, maybe genuine racism in this country?
Well, I think, as I say, racism in this, I mean, the UK has a history of kind of colonialism and slavery, and there is large kind of repercussions to that, which means that there are people in the country that believe in racial superiority, that are very, very, very anti-immigration, etc., etc., and that exists in different pockets. And the person who wrote this article in The Guardian, I believe, he comes from the countryside. He grew up in the countryside, and he was writing about his own experience. He never said within the article the countryside is worse than the than urban areas. He never said it's horrific. I think definitely when people are talking about their own lived experiences and they grew up in a certain area, they're allowed to do that. They're allowed to talk about the particulars of that. I think. But yeah, we should always be balanced about these things, and we shouldn't make it out like all these rural farmers off there are racist and everyone else gets off scot-free.
Exactly that. Look, thank you very much, both of you. It's been great to have you both on the show. Femi Nylander there, who's an actor and a writer, and Tim Bonner, who's Chief Executive of the Countryside Alliance. Great stuff, that. Look, we are going to be returning to that discussion a little bit later on, but let's get more now on a story that I covered yesterday. King Charles has got his revenge on Harry and Meghan. He's chucking them out of Frogmore Cottage, which was given to them as a wedding gift from the Queen. But according to reports, Frogmore isn't going to be empty for long because Prince Andrew could move in. Now, Harry and Meghan held their wedding reception at Frogmore in 2018, but they've not spent much time there since relocating to California. And supposedly, they're absolutely shocked, blindsided by this. And joining me now is the royal commentator Michael Cole. Michael, I believe you've been delving into some of the history of Frogmore Cottage and all sorts. You've done your research. Talk to me.
Absolutely. Well, this is a right royal game of musical chairs, isn't it, Patrick? Or maybe it's gilt-edged Monopoly with the pieces being moved around the board. What is happening, as you so rightly summarised it, is that the Sussexes have been given their notice to quit Frogmore Cottage. Now, let's be fair, they hardly lived there. I don't think they'd even unpacked the packing cases by the time they scooted off to Canada with their young baby son, Archie. And, of course, this just recognises the reality that they are now committed to America. This is their last, shall we say, property link to this country, and we'll see how often or otherwise they ever come back here. But the interesting thing, and you've put your finger on it, is the fact that the king now wants his younger brother, Andrew, to move out of Royal Lodge. Now, Royal Lodge is an absolutely beautiful house, a big white wedding cake of a property set in 98 glorious acres of Windsor Great Park. It's got 30 rooms. Now, if Prince Andrew, who has this rather strange menage with his ex-wife, Sarah, Duchess of York, 26 years after their divorce, they live together at Royal Lodge, he will find it a bit of a squeeze getting into Frogmore Cottage, which used to be a collection of rather ramshackle buildings used by members of the royal staff. There's only 5 bedrooms there. I don't know whether there'll be any room for the servants, and I'm sure they've got servants. So this is a big switch around. But what I think it's really about, and we want to be ahead of things on GB News, is the fact that the king is slimming down the royal family, and he wants a suitably grand and prestigious property for his elder son, Prince William, the Prince of Wales, and the Princess of Wales and their 3 children. And Royal Lodge is a much-loved royal residence. The Queen Mother lived there and died there, indeed, in 2002, and her husband loved the place too. And, of course, it has one big advantage, that it's it's probably the easiest royal residence to protect from a security point of view. It's set among trees, amid all the land, which I've
got to ask, Michael, if this is the case, and you are right, I think, to be ahead of the curve, as you always are when it comes to our royal advice here. Do you think that what this really means is that King Charles likes Prince Andrew more than he likes Prince Harry?
I think it's close at the moment, to be frank with you. I really do. But I think what we're actually seeing, Patrick, and this is important, is the swinging fist of majesty. King Charles waited 70 years to take the top job, as Princess Diana called it. Now he's on the throne. He's certainly got absolute power within his own family, and they're feeling the draft from it. It cannot be seen as anything other than a personal demotion, almost a humiliation for Andrew to be told where he's going to live. He's already lost his apartment at Buckingham Palace, and this is definitely his elder brother putting him in his place.
I tell you what, I mean, if he feels too awful about it and he wants to give it up, I would happily live in Frogmore Cottage. It is, as I keep saying, not a cottage. Look, thank you very, very much, Michael. Always an absolute pleasure. Michael Cole there, royal commentator, does his research, doesn't he? There we go. So when we start to read stories in about a week's time of Prince William, our future king, and his family moving into Royal Lodge, you can tell your friends you saw it right here first. But time for a little break, I think. We've got one coming your way now. But in a few minutes, I will have more on Matt Hancock's WhatsApp messages and discuss the damaging effects that lockdown had on the health of children across the UK. Was children's health put as secondary to him getting one over, Hancock getting one over Williamson, and is that shameful? And Lee Anderson, get a load of this, has a novel solution to the UK's labour shortage. I absolutely love this. Force prisoners to pick fruit and veg. Put prisoners to work. GBNews at gbnews.uk. See you in a tip.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 4 o'clock. You're with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. Now, teaching unions are lazy backsides of human beings who hate work. No, not my words, not at all. It's the words of Matt Hancock and Gavin Williamson. The latest round of the lockdown files hint at the idea that Hancock wanted to close the schools to get one over Williamson. Kids are now thicker and more unhealthy than before as a result, but the bigger picture here is this. Has Matt Hancock actually been betrayed? The great British countryside, when we think about it, what do we see? We see lush meadows, rolling hills, glorious landscapes. But did you know that it's actually racist? That's right, people. People think that too many white people live in rural Britain and something must be done about that. I am asking, is the countryside racist? We had one debate on that last hour. I've got more coming your way shortly. Political correctness is a gift to Islamist terrorism. That is according to Home Secretary Suella Braverman. On a similar note, I will be reacting to the Manchester Arena bombing inquiry, which has found that the sick, twisted terrorist could and possibly should have been stopped. But who is really to blame here? Is it MI5 or could it be the bomber's own family? Get your emails coming in thick and fast. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Do you think Hancock was betrayed, or, as I'm already seeing in the inbox, to the tune of hundreds, if not thousands, is the countryside racist? It's got like you going, that. gbviews@gbnews.uk. But right now it's your headlines with the wonderful Polly Middlehurst.
Patrick, thank you, and good afternoon to you. Our top story on GB News today, as you've been hearing, an inquiry into the Manchester Arena terror attack has found MI5 missed significant opportunities that might have prevented the bombing. The report found the security service failed to act on intelligence received in the months before the attack in 2017. Information relating to the suicide bomber Salman Abedi was assessed at the time as not terror-related. It also found he could have been arrested at Manchester Airport 4 days before he went on to kill 22 people at the Ariana Grande concert. The Home Secretary says she's committed to working with MI5 and preventing any other attacks. A lawyer for the families has spoken outside the inquiry, and they say the victims have been failed at every level.
It is clear that Salman Abedi should have been referred to prevent. It is clear that the education system needs to be more vigilant in picking up signs of radicalisation. It is clear that Didsbury Mosque turned a blind eye to extremism in its midst. Sir John's report today contains many lessons. We must heed every one of them and make the necessary changes urgently.
Well, in other news today, police investigating the death of a missing newborn baby who was found in Brighton last night say the newborn may have been dead for some time. The remains were found in Woodland, close to where Constance Martin and her partner Mark Gordon were arrested on Monday. The couple had evaded the authorities for more than 7 weeks and refused to give any information on the location or the welfare of their baby. They're currently being held on suspicion of child neglect manslaughter.
At this stage, we have not yet been able to confirm the baby's gender, and a post-mortem examination has not yet taken place. Despite this, based on our inquiries we've carried out so far, we believe, sadly, the baby may have been dead for some time before they were found. It's too early for us to provide a more specific date.
In other news today, in the last hour, reports are coming in that Sue Gray has been hired as Sir Keir Starmer's new Chief of Staff. The senior civil servant led the investigation into Partygate. It's understood she'll resign her role in the Cabinet Office and take up a position in the Labour Party. Bring you forward further detail on that as soon as we get it. Now, stay with politics. Boris Johnson has expressed concerns over Rishi Sunak's new Brexit deal for Northern Ireland. Speaking in Westminster, the former Prime Minister said he'd find it very difficult to vote for the Windsor framework, saying it wasn't about the UK taking back control. The deal aims with the EU to fix post-Brexit trade problems in Northern Ireland. Boris Johnson also admitted he'd made mistakes in signing his Northern Ireland protocol that caused the DUP to walk out of power sharing at Stormont.
I find it very difficult to vote for something like this myself, because I believed that we should have done something different. No matter how much plaster came off the ceiling in Brussels. And I hope that it will work. And I also hope that if it doesn't work, we will have the guts to deploy that bill again.
Matt Hancock says he's the victim of a massive betrayal after more than 100,000 of his WhatsApp messages were leaked. The former Health Secretary handed over his text to the journalist Isabel Oakeshott as they collaborated on his memoirs. She then, though, passed them on to the Telegraph newspaper, and the paper claims Mr Hancock clashed with the then Education Secretary Sir Gavin Williamson over schools during the COVID pandemic. Hancock reportedly said he was mounting a rear-guard action to close schools in December 2020, despite Sir Gavin fighting tooth and nail to keep them open. Teachers in Wales and the south of England have been on strike today in a dispute over pay. It's the third walkout by members of the National Education Union this week, with previous industrial action taking place in the north of England and the Midlands. The Education Secretary had invited teaching unions to take part in talks on the condition the strikes were suspended, but they're demanding a better pay offer first. Further national strikes in England and Wales are planned for March the 15th and 16th. Those are your latest news headlines. I'm back in an hour. Back to Patrick.
OK, yet again, a lot to go at today, ladies and gentlemen, when it comes to the lockdown files. And the journalist responsible for revealing Matt Hancock's WhatsApp messages, Isabel Oakeshott, has insisted that the leaks were in the public interest. Now, this is a key point. Has Hancock been betrayed, or is this in the public interest? Exchanges between the former Health Secretary and other senior officials have been published in the Telegraph newspaper, revealing rifts between senior cabinet ministers on public health policy during the pandemic. Hancock's described the disclosure of the messages he handed to Oakeshott for the purpose of writing his memoirs as a massive betrayal and a breach of trust. But just this afternoon, new texts were revealed. This time, former Prime Minister Boris Johnson is involved. Now, they revealed the former PM was worried the UK had blinked too soon by going into a second national lockdown. And this is where I'm going to kickstart this hour with, because I know that a lot of people feel deeply frustrated about the idea of us raking up coronavirus and lockdowns again. And I get that, and I do feel quite similarly as well. But all this stuff is out there now, and I think that for a lot of people who were at the time saying we don't really need a second lockdown, and also crucially said, I'm not sure I 100% trust the data and the predictions and all of this that were being given. Well, this actually, I think, is in some ways, a bit of a vindication for some of these people, because the messages that have come out appear to suggest that Boris Johnson was told, actually, the data might be a bit squiffy, and maybe we have, yes, quote, blinked too soon on a second national lockdown. And annoyingly for a lot of people, they decided to go ahead with it anyway, because potentially the optics would have looked bad. So were we put in a second national lockdown based on the fact that the government thought it might look like the right thing to do, not actually be the right thing to do? Joining me now is our political reporter, Catherine Forster, who is in Westminster for us. Catherine, can you just explain to us really a bit, I think, about the latest lines that are coming out in these lockdown files?
Sure, coming thick and fast, these revelations, aren't they? So this is concerning Boris Johnson and the timing of lockdown, specifically the second lockdown that lasted a month began in November of 2020. Now, the day after the lockdown had been announced, Boris Johnson apparently expressed concerns that maybe he had blinked too soon and that possibly the data that the scientists gave him might have been wrong. Now, of course, throughout the pandemic, we were told, weren't we, again and again, we're following the science, as if the science was some definitive thing that could be measured. But of course, different scientists had different projections, different forecasts, different estimates throughout this. And so clearly it shows now that behind the scenes, behind the outward unity, there were lots of concerns, there were lots of doubts. And also at the end of the first lockdown, Boris Johnson had been asking whether they could bring Britain out of the first lockdown sooner, and was advised by his advisors at the time that the public weren't ready to come out of lockdown, that the public were too frightened, that that wasn't the right approach. So being guided effectively by public opinion rather than the science. So a fascinating picture. And of course, this is only day 2 from these 100,000 WhatsApp messages that have been leaked. We've had all these really damaging revelations. Today, these about Boris Johnson, showing just how human, I guess, everybody in government was. And Gavin Williamson now in hot water about what he said about the teaching unions, and who knows what tomorrow will bring.
Well, indeed, we will just have to wait and see. Thank you very much, Catherine. Catherine Forster there, who's our political reporter in Westminster for us. So the first thing to go at in this particular hour is exactly what we've just spoken about, which is whether or not we were held in the first lockdown too long and then put into a second lockdown, not based on science, despite the fact that we were all being told we were following the science, based actually on potentially quite flawed science and on the grounds of what people thought public opinion was. I would also question what public opinion the government was really listening to, and their advisors. Were they listening to the likes of your usual media types who were standing in front of them every day, shouting at them, the public are terrified, we all need to be locked away? When I know for a fact that there were a huge section of the British population who did want to be out and about, allowed to go back to work, and were more worried about the consequences of lockdown than actually getting COVID itself. Isn't it also interesting that Boris Johnson, it would appear anyway, was genuinely very keen to get us out of that first lockdown as quickly as possible and to not put us into the second one, but did, of course, crucially, and something he can't get away from, unfortunately for Boris, is that he just ploughed on with it anyway. But was public opinion forcing us all into lockdowns and nothing more than that? Because if so, well, we're all still paying the price for it, aren't we? This nation is still paying the price for it. And if that was done based on, well, government's optics and not actual facts, I think that makes it all even more rum, doesn't it? But what was the effect of actually closing the schools on children's health? That was the line when we were certainly planning the show this morning, which is that it appears there was some kind of row between Gavin Williamson, who was Education Secretary at the time, which was quite a good job, actually, because he does look and act rather a lot like Professor Snape out of Harry Potter. So he was in charge of the schools. He supposedly wanted to keep them open, and Matt Hancock supposedly wanted to keep them closed. Williamson initially won that round, and then Matt Hancock, the Health Secretary, lobbied hard to keep the schools closed. And where are we now? Have we got a generation of COVID-idiot woke kids who are basically struggling to even do up their own shoelaces, people who were given overinflated A-level results and have gone on to a university way above their station only to drop out and fall at the first hurdle? From a younger years development as well, concerning reports are coming out about children who are struggling to speak and also even walk. But what have the overall effects been? Joining me now is Carl Hennigan, who's a professor of evidence-based medicine. Now, there's something. A professor of evidence-based medicine and a clinical epidemiologist. Look, thank you very much. You've actually been named by Boris Johnson in the latest batch of texts released, saying that you advised him that certain death modelling he'd seen was very wrong. Can you talk to me about that, please?
Yeah, certainly. Look, we worked very hard to try and get the other side of the story. What you're showing here is the government going for most of 2020 was presented with one side of the story, which was based around fear. And coming into November, we saw this position where we was looking at the data and just noticed these subtle issues like they're out of date by 3 weeks, and the real data is very different to the models. And the Prime Minister's getting up and saying one thing, and actually the truth is far from what he's saying. So the numbers he was saying were fourfold greater than the actual data. We worked hard with some of the advisors at that point wanted to present a different side of the story to inform the debate, not just with the best available evidence. This is just, it might not have been wrong, the data was wrong. And in the story, about 5 days later, they did admit we made mistakes, and they said it was an honest mistake. But by then, it was too late. We were already in lockdown. The policy had been enacted, and it had been based on this problem of fear selling the policy.
So is it fair to say that if you had been Chris Whitty, then kids would have been in school and our economy might not have been as much of a mess as it is now?
So I think there are two different things going on here. The important job I do is to help inform the decision. ultimately, ministers have to be in charge of the decision. But what I think was happening, a lot of advisors had made up their policies and decided what needed to happen, and then were retrofitting the data to suit their policy. And once you put out there's going to be 4,000 deaths a day, it's almost a done deal. But if you suddenly come round and say, well, actually, the number's going to be 500 to 800, and actually some of that is what we'll expect to see at the time of year, you make a different decision. So I was saying...
That's a massive... Let me come in here, because that is a vital point, which you appear to be hinting at. The idea that they'd come up with a policy which was lock down, kids off school, and they had been presented with some, in your view, completely flawed evidence to say that this is the amount of people who will die. And then when they were confronted with the fact that that evidence was wrong, they decided that in order to not look bad, they would just carry on scaring the living heck out of us and keeping us all locked down and the kids off school.
And I think that's the reality, and we'll just press ahead again. And in doing so, you're right, we're going to close schools again, which has had catastrophic consequences which will be felt for years to come and decades. And I think this is the issue. If you're being just given one side of the story, our job was to try and present the alternative and say, look, actually, Minister, Prime Minister, look at the data. The real actual data, the evidence-based data, if you like, is very different. But the problem is it was going at such a pace by then, by the Saturday night, it was a done deal. It was almost too late to unravel a problem that had been coming for weeks before. And I have to say the approach to data, which I saw throughout that first year of the pandemic, was so poor, it doesn't surprise me that ministers made bad, erroneous decisions many times throughout.
But hang on a minute. This time yesterday, we were talking about why is it that relatives of elderly dying people in care homes couldn't hold their hand as they took their final breath. We were wondering why people had to die alone for a ring of steel, which it would appear did not exist around care homes. And now what you appear to be telling me is that people had their businesses closed and their children's early years development shattered in a way that, frankly, might affect them for the rest of their lives and might go on to affect their parents economically for the rest of their lives, based, again, on no real reason, no justification, is what you're saying. Is that right or not?
Well, look, I think you have to set policy, but when you set policy on the wrong data, you basically will come to bad policies. What happened in the midst of that, people were so fearful, so anxious, that it's right to say, even when we pointed that out in the Telegraph, people generally ignored it and just went, well, we're going to go in lockdown anyhow because we're so scared. It's only now in the light of day when people are emerging and gaining their confidence, people are starting to ask the serious questions. And what's happened with these WhatsApp messages is we're starting to realise that the decisions were made at pace, on the hoof, and just were not informed by high-quality evidence and accurate data. And to be honest with you, when you look at this in the light of the day of the inquiry, they're going to say, no wonder we had bad policies.
Yeah, indeed. And I can't really get my head around how many people suffered, potentially anyway, just so that politicians didn't contradict themselves on the telly, even though they obviously massively went on to do. And it might also imply as to why so many of them were pictured without masks at a variety of events, whether it was a G7 event or something like that. I mean, you know, people were saying, weren't they, hang on a minute, this lot don't look particularly scared about it. I can remember a time, actually, now I come to think of it, when Boris got COVID, Whitty had COVID, quite a few people did, and it emerged that they'd been having meetings in quite close, non-socially distanced rooms. Meanwhile, we were all shackled to, metaphorically at least, Chris Whitty's radiator, weren't we? But look, we're going to have to leave it there, I'm afraid. But thank you very much, Carl. Great stuff, and I hope to speak to you again soon. Carl Hennigan there, who's Professor of Evidence-Based Medicine and Clinical Epidemiologist. That was damning, wasn't it, from the bloke who was named in the latest round of these lockdown files, the latest round of WhatsApp messages. That was the chap there who was named in those, who was telling the people who were making the decisions that the data was flawed and that there was no need for us to be doing what we were doing, and that the government appeared to be aware of that and then decided, allegedly, that the optics of that would be bad. And so we all had to endure something as a result, it would appear anyway, of them having made a decision that they didn't want to go back on just in case it looked a bit squiffy. However, Matt Hancock has released a statement, and we can bring that to you now, at least part of it. He said, "I'm hugely disappointed and sad at the massive betrayal and breach of trust by Isabel Oakeshott. There is absolutely no public interest case for this huge breach. All the materials for the book have already been made available to the inquiry, which is the right and only place for everything to be considered properly and the right lessons to be learned. As we have seen, releasing them in this way gives a partial, biased account to suit an anti-lockdown agenda." That is interesting. That's Matt Hancock's comments, and we could not have timed it any better than having the chap on who was named in those WhatsApp messages just earlier to give, it's fair to say, a radically different view than the one in Matt Hancock's statement there. Both sides of the coin here on GB News. We're moving away from that now, though, because the third and final report into the Manchester Arena bombing was released earlier this afternoon. Now, it makes for morbidly but fascinating reading, OK? Lots of different things identified here. The inquiry found that the attack might have been prevented if MI5 had acted on some key intelligence that was received in the months leading up to the attack. There's much more to it. We will pick our way through the detail as this show progresses, including as well some serious concerns about the mosque in Disbury, where Salman Abedi went and attended to. But just for now, let's cross live now to our GB News North West of England reporter, Sophie Reaper, who's been at the inquiry for us. Sophie, thank you very much. Take it away. What's the latest?
Good afternoon to you, Patrick. Well, in the last hour or so, we've heard various statements from family members who lost loved ones in the Manchester Arena attack. First, we heard a statement on behalf of the family of Chloe Rutherford and Liam Curry, the boyfriend and girlfriend couple who were killed in the attack. They said, "Forgiveness will never be enough for such evil, and we will always believe you all played a part in the murder of our children." Then we heard a statement on behalf of 11 of the families, a combined statement, if you will. They said that they trust the recommendations that Sir John Saunders made will be implemented, and that their loved ones had every right to feel safe and protected, but they were failed at every level. Finally, we heard from the mother of Martin Hett, who was also killed in the attack, Fegan Murray. She said that today is about moving forward, but that terrorism continues to plague our society. Here's a little bit more of what she had to say.
All three volumes point to an abundance of mistake and failures by a raft of different organisations, services and people. We need more cohesion and more communication between our services. We need a more efficient system in place to ensure the different pieces of the jigsaw come together. We are not here to point fingers. The bottom line is everyone who made mistakes, every service that was lacking on the night, every organisation who missed something in the lead-up to the attack is now aware of their failings.
Well, this afternoon, the third and final volume of the Manchester Arena inquiry has been published, and a key point that was mentioned was that if MI5 had acted on key intelligence that was received in the months before, the attack might have been prevented. Well, we can bring you now that in the last few minutes, MI5 Director General Ken McCallum has said that he's profoundly sorry that MI5 did not prevent the attack, and that he also deeply regrets that such intelligence was not obtained. We've also heard this afternoon from Home Secretary Suella Braverman. She said she's committed to working with bodies such as MI5 in order to implement those recommendations that have been made today and previously by Sir John Saunders as part of that Arena inquiry. Now, the inquiry has now been heard in full. That's now in effect over. But what's not over is the grief that the loved ones of those 22 people who were killed will have to live with for the rest of their lives.
Yes, indeed. Look, Sophie, thank you very much. Sophie Reaper there, our North West of England reporter, who is at that inquiry, has been at that inquiry in Manchester. Lots of different factors to come out of that. Sophie obviously identified a few of them. Another one that I'm quite keen to discuss a little bit later on is about the mosque in question. It's the Disbury Mosque. And now it's important to know this, as it's not an active factor or cause in the radicalisation of suicide bomber Salman Abedi, but it did say that there was a willful blindness to a highly charged debate about the Libya conflict. And it raises that question, is enough being done at a community level when it comes to combating radicalisation? You know, some of the literature in some of these places, some of the people that they have to talk, not just in mosques, by the way, but in a variety of different areas as well. But in the context of this, of course, mosques. So there we go. Has political correctness allowed Islamist extremism to flourish in the UK. So we're linking onto this now. The Home Secretary thinks so. She thinks that political correctness has basically been a shot in the arm for radical Islamism. We'll discuss that shortly. I'll see you in a bit.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nah, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
Is the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching. Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Yes, welcome back. Look, some serious news to start this particular segment of the show. Police today confirmed that they believe the remains of a baby found near Brighton following the arrest of Constance Martin and Mark Gordon may have been dead for some time. We can speak to GB News' national reporter Theo Chicomba, who's in Brighton for us. Theo, thank you. So what can you tell us?
Yes, good afternoon. Well, earlier this afternoon, the police who were questioning Constance Martin and Mark Gordon confirmed that the baby whose remains were found in the woodland here in Brighton has been dead for some time. They haven't yet been able to confirm the gender of the baby following the post-mortem which took place. Now, they also mentioned that there are still some unanswered questions and investigations are continuing. During that press conference, we understand that officers from the Metropolitan Police will remain in this area, and some of them are still here this afternoon. And of course, Sussex Police also confirmed that they will be drawing back some of their officers who've been part of the large-scale search which has been been taking place here in the allotments and the woodland behind me. Now, they also confirmed that the couple who had been missing for 53 days, who are avoiding contact with anybody, and the police were searching for them, Constance Martin and Mark Gordon, have been arrested on suspicion of gross negligence manslaughter. They remain in custody. Now, there was a police cordon in this area. As I mentioned, police will be drawing back from here. There is still some neighbourhood police officers who are here, so if members of the public do have any questions or they do have any concerns, they can speak to them as well. The investigation is still continuing, and we'll be here for the latest updates.
All right, look, Theo, thank you very much. Theo Chikomba there, who's GB News' national reporter in Brighton, with the latest on that deeply, deeply disturbing case. Now, later this hour, I am going to be talking about the local councillor who was born male but now claims being called he or him is bullying, so there's quite a lot to go out there. We've even got a nice little video clip for you. I have been getting a lot of your emails in as well, by the way, gbviews@gbnews.uk, about whether or not the countryside is racist. I'm going to be delving into the terrifying world of my inbox shortly and getting your thoughts on this. Basically, the angle on that is that someone thinks that there are far too many white middle-class people in the countryside and that we should do something about that. But your views. But before that, it's time for your headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Patrick, thank you. The top story this afternoon, MI5 Director General says he's profoundly sorry that MI5 did not prevent the attack following the inquiry into the Manchester Arena bombing. The report found the security service failed to act on information relating to suicide bomber Salman Abedi, which at the time was not assessed as terror-related. It also found Abedi could have been arrested at Manchester Airport 4 days before he went on to kill 22 people at the Ariana Grande concert. The Home Secretary says she's committed to working with MI5 and will do everything possible to prevent another attack. A lawyer for the families has spoken outside the inquiry, saying the victims have been failed at every level.
It is clear that Salman Abedi should have been referred to prevent. It is clear that the education system needs to be more vigilant in picking up signs of radicalisation. It is clear that Didsbury Mosque turned a blind eye to extremism in its midst. Sir John's report today contains many lessons. We must heed every one of them and make the necessary changes urgently.
Police investigating the death of a missing baby who was found in Brighton last night say the newborn may have been dead for some time. The remains were found in woodland, close to where Constance Martin and Mark Gordon were arrested on Monday. The couple had evaded authorities for more than 7 weeks and refused to give any information on the location or welfare of their baby. They're currently being held on suspicion of child neglect manslaughter. A Labour source has told GB News that Sue Gray has been hired as Sir Keir Starmer's Chief of Staff. The senior civil servant led the investigation into Partygate. It's understood she'll resign her role in the Cabinet Office to take up a position in the Labour Party. A Downing Street spokesman says the resignation has been accepted with immediate effect. Those are your latest news headlines. I'm back in half an hour. See you then.
OK, welcome back. Well, it is that time of the year again where The Guardian likes to claim that pretty much everything is racist. This time, it's the countryside. And lots of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts on the countryside being racist. And in case you're wondering why I'm banging on about this, it's because I'm a bit sick of it, actually. Every single month or so, there appears to be some article about the fact that the countryside in Britain appears to be majority white. Well, I've got the latest census in front of me here, and 82% of people in England and Wales are white, 18% belong to black, Asian, mixed or other ethnic groups. So would it not be quite surprising if the countryside was anything other than mostly white? But Alan says the countryside is not racist at all. It is safer than most towns and cities. OK, Laura says if a minority person wishes to live in the countryside, then they can go. No one is stopping them. The woke just likes to play the racism card at every possible chance. Now, I had a debate on this in the last hour. I'm also going to return to it in the next hour. It's just your emails on this for now, but keep them coming in, because the discussion here is about whether or not, genuinely, the countryside excludes people of ethnic minority backgrounds by virtue of the fact that it might be expensive to get to. So there's that side of it. Do you not think that's a bit patronising and a bit condescending? It's also actually genuinely not that expensive to get to, is it? And certainly in the case of going from Manchester to Cumbria, for example, pretty cheap, OK? So there's that. There's also the idea, isn't there, that people who live in the countryside deliberately exclude other people by virtue of simply being white, and the notion as well of landowners blocking off and ring-fencing land. 2 points on that. If the land is ring-fenced, then white people can't walk on it either, I suppose. But also, as well, what is wrong with people owning land and then putting a fence around it? I'm not sure there's too much wrong with that. Caroline says the countryside is free. Anyone can go there if they wish. Strong views on the countryside, quite categorically, as far as you're concerned, not being racist, but we will return to that particular debate very, very shortly. Now, though, is political correctness getting in the way of combating Islamist extremism? Because the Home Secretary says that she thinks it is, and we're delving into that, especially in light of the fact that it's just been the latest inquiry, the final inquiry, into the Manchester Arena bombing as well. Do you think that political correctness is actually not just getting in the way of tackling Islamist extremism, but maybe in some ways helping to promote it? I'll be on with that very shortly.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island's story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nah, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel. Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one.
Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview channel 236.
And YouView channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
OK, let's get stuck in, because Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, has reportedly said that political correctness is creating a blind spot in which Islamist extremists are operating under the radar. Now, according to The Times, the Home Secretary told a counter-extremism conference that there can be no place for political correctness in our national security. And it comes as the final report of the Manchester Arena bombing inquiry revealed the attack might have been prevented if MI5 had acted on key intelligence received in the months before. It's also worth noting that the mosque in question, Disbury Mosque, also came in for some criticism as a result of this. In the past hour, Suella Braverman said she is committed to working with MI5 and the police do everything possible to prevent a repeat of the horrifying attack. Look, to discuss this further about whether or not woke and political correct behaviour is actually not just preventing us from dealing with Islamist terrorism, but actually maybe aiding and abetting it. I am joined by social policy analyst. It's Dr. Rakib Hassan. Dr. Rakib, thank you very much. Do you think that political correctness is actually encouraging extremism, Islamist extremism?
Well, I think that some of our public institutions are paralysed by the forces of racial and religious identity politics, which may well hinder our counter-extremism operations. We've had previous discussions, Patrick, about how there is the risk of public bodies who are part of the broader prevent structure, how they may, because of those racial and religious sensitivities or the fear of being accused of being racist, how they may be more reluctant to report suspected forms of Islamist-related radicalization. And it's something that we really tackle. And I certainly agree with the Home Secretary when she says that she would like to see political correctness banished when it comes to the sphere of national security.
Indeed. I am concerned about whether or not things can often start within a community and people feel too afraid sometimes to go into that community and try to do something about it. And I am now talking about Disbury Mosque, which was attended by the bomber Salman Abedi. Now, it's important to say that the mosque was not deemed to have been an active factor or cause in the radicalisation of suicide bomber Salman Abedi and his accomplice brother Hashem. However, it did also go on to say that it believed that the mosque had willful blindness to a highly charged debate about Libya, and there was a statement read out on the steps of the inquiry afterwards that was very, very damning about the mosque. What I am intrigued by is that the mosque's response to a lot of this appears to be to say that they are being demonised and that this isn't right, and it's being lapped up by the usual media types who are saying the headlines are more mosque defends itself and not actually things like, well, what's the report said about the mosque? And is that political correctness getting in the way of us having a discussion maybe about what is and isn't said in some mosques in the country?
Well, I think that we should give credit to places of worship that do fantastic work when it comes to interfaith dialogue and social cohesion. But we should also be free to question places of worship and religious associations who may not be doing particularly well when it comes to social cohesion. And indeed, if there's a risk that there are divisive narratives which are being peddled within particular places of worship and religious associations, then that needs to be talked about. And that's very important to challenge that from a counter-extremism perspective. And the reality is that when it comes to counter-extremism and anti-extremism work, I would say that some associations who seem to be part of the solution are in fact part of the problem, Patrick.
OK, just elaborate on that slightly for me then. Do you think that some people are, instead of part of the solution, part of the problem? What are you talking about?
Well, I think that there was concerns that prevent-related funding was being allocated to organisations which were found to be peddling divisive narratives. Now,
well, one
if
of them
they're being provided that
kind of supported the Taliban, yeah. Carry on.
But precisely. So I think that we need to take these kind of problems very seriously, especially when it comes to more robust due diligence and it come when also looking at what the process is behind the allocation of such funding. Because I tell you what, in the middle of a cost of living crisis, you certainly don't want hardworking people's taxes being allocated to charities that work exactly against what that funding is meant to be there for.
Do you think, honestly, Dr. Rakib, sometimes there is a genuine concern about whether or not someone is going to be an Islamist terrorist, and instead of people looking into that properly, they don't because they're worried about being called a racist?
Well, I think that people are worried of, in terms of being accused of racism, Islamophobia. They're also worried about being accused of undermining religious freedom. I would make the point that when it comes to counter-extremism, there's simply no space for those kinds of concerns. Now, of course, we're very much against the sort of wide, grand sweeping generalizations. But actually, by behaving like this and tiptoeing, you essentially undermine the influence of anti-Islamist British Muslims who are very concerned about forms of extremism within their own local communities. And I think we should really be wary in terms of weakening their hand.
Yeah, indeed. Look, thank you very much. That's his social policy analyst, Dr. Rakib Hassan, giving his views on what the Home Secretary said earlier, which is that, her views anyway, political correctness sometimes gets in the way of us tackling, not just gets in the way, actually, can in some ways actively help promote radical Islamist terrorism. That is in light of the latest Manchester Arena bombing inquiry and the last Manchester Arena bombing inquiry as well. But I'm moving on now to another Tory grandee. Is he a grandee? Would you say Deputy Conservative Party Chairman Lee Anderson? Yes. Now, he has said that prisoners should be made to pick fruit and veg to solve the UK's agricultural labour shortage. The MP for Ashfield argued that those languishing in jail could help tackle the lack of seasonal farm workers. He also claimed that food banks are being abused by people who don't actually need them. So we've kind of got a 2-for-1. Buy one, get one free on Lee Anderson today. With me now is Benjamin Loughnane, who's a research fellow at the Bow Group. Look, thank you very much. Should we put prisoners to work?
Yeah, absolutely. At the moment, they cost an enormous amount just to keep people in prison. It's about 40 grand a year per prisoner. So it'd be good to get some money back for the taxpayers so they're not entirely a burden on public funds. But also, we've got this sort of namby-pamby idea that prisoners are there to be reformed, to be made better rather than to be punished. And I think this sort of work, this sort of labour would actually bring us back to actually punishing prisoners rather than seeing them as, these hard-up cases we just need to try to get better, almost in a kind of a psychiatric way. We do need to get back to the idea of there being some punishment. But on the flip side, there is a big problem in places like America of prisons for profit. Now, this idea that if you incarcerate as many people as possible and get them on these long terms, it actually benefits people, it drives profit. I think there needs to be a line drawn so that we don't run into the problem that America has. But there's absolutely no reason we shouldn't have people, prisoners, being put to work. And it would also stop all of these seasonal work visas that people would end up overstaying and become illegal migrants in this country off the back of. It would also help get rid of that problem.
Yeah, so you think it could actually solve quite a few problems. So the taxpayer could start getting a bit of bang for their buck. We've got these people locked up. We might as well put them to work. Also, crucially, we wouldn't have all the tomato shortages potentially, although I understand that was weather-related, but we might not have stuff like that. So we could actually see, I don't know, people in orange jumpsuits almost like shackled to each other picking fruits and veg. I mean, you could probably brand that at some kind of boutique veg shop in Shoreditch, couldn't you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a perfectly sensible idea. It's the sort of thing that a Tory government with 13 years in power and an 80-seat majority should be doing. And I'm not sure why they haven't done it yet. And I think Lee Anderson is absolutely correct. He's really in touch with what the people of the country want to see. And I'm glad to finally see some sensible policy decisions being put on the table by this party.
OK, all right. But do you not think there is another problem, though, with Lee Anderson now, which is that the Tory party won't listen to him because, actually, he's maybe a bit too normal?
Yeah, I do think there is the danger of him being given as a sort of an offering to the public to say, look, we've got one of your lot in, a top job. but we're not actually going to listen to him. He'll say the things that you want to hear, but we're not going to implement any of it. And there is a danger of that. But I think, it would be a great move for Rishi if he turned around and said, we're going to deal with the seasonal worker situation. We're going to deal with the problem we have with fruit picking. We're going to stop bringing people in from places like Romania and Bulgaria who then overstay their visas. That'll be solved. We're also going to start, giving something back to our farming communities. So I think you can only win. There's no good reason for the party not to pursue this policy.
I think if people whose land it is are willing to consent to have a load of cons on it, picking the fruit and veg, then what's the problem with it, really? Some people would argue, though, Ben, I suppose, that it's slave labour.
Yeah, but as I said, these are people in prison. They're not going to be given the same wages as everyone else, but it's already slave labour, because the way it currently works is that these people are flown in and they get paid a minimum wage, the minimum wage that we have in this country, but then they have to pay for their accommodation. And who provides that accommodation? The people who run the farms. And so they get half of that money back or more in the accommodation that they provide to the workers. So they end up, the take-home pay ends up being far, far below minimum wage. It's already slave labour class. I think it makes much more sense to pay people or to hire people who are in prison for that sort of work, rather than people who've done nothing wrong.
I would actually quite like to see people's heads implode when they're talking about the idea that now, you can't possibly have someone who's serving 20 years for murder getting this particular potato out of the ground. It's like, all right, we'll fly this bloke over from Albania then, shall we, and make him live in utter squalor in a farm when hopefully he won't outstay his visa. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. Benjamin, thank you very much, as ever. Benjamin Loughnane there, who's a research fellow at the Bow Group. Fascinating stuff. The latest offering from Lee Anderson there, which is that basically we should, in his view, get prisoners to do things like go out and pick fruit and veg. Why not? We've got a labour shortage. They could go and do it, and it also might teach them a bit of community in a hard day's graft. I don't know. What do you think? Get in touch. GBViews at gbnews.uk. Now, I've not got much time left in this hour, but I really wanted to get to this story. Here's a question for you. What is the job of a local councillor? Now, if you ask me, they're there to make sure our bins get emptied, our potholes get fixed, and places like libraries and sports centres are there for the local community. Basically, it's their job to make our lives just that little bit better. It is not a councillor's job to spit their dummy out and flounce out of a meeting because, horror of horrors, they've been misgendered. But that is exactly what Danny Keeling, who you won't be surprised to learn is a Green Party politician, did on Monday night. Keeling now, who uses the pronouns they and them, wasn't happy when Newham Council Chairman Winston Vaughan misgendered them, and he decided to walk off. So, unfortunately, when Vaughan apologised, he still couldn't quite get it right. I'm just going to play you, I believe, a little clip now of what happened when Vaughan tried desperately to apologise.
Misrepresenting the councillors' name, I should have said them rather than he. So I do apologise for that. And I think that's what's affected him, is it? It's there. That's... Yes, so my apologies to him for misquoting. Okay. For them, sorry. Thank you very much.
That is absolute gold. Anyway, he got up and walked out. Danny Keeling said, I've just had enough of being misgendered, and claimed that it's bullying. So joining me now to discuss this is Caroline Fisk, who is a founder of Conservatives for Women and is a former Conservative councillor. Caroline, thank you very much. Is this really where we've sunk to now, which is that a councillor is walking out, supposedly, of council meetings based on the fact that somebody has misgendered them?
Well, in this one instance, it is. And I guess what I'm sad about is that the other councillor apologised. We just can't go on with a situation where we've got very serious work to be undertaken in local councils, and it's disrupted by this sort of pettiness. So I hope in that council they have a think and they decide not to apologise in future. We've got to be allowed to use our English language as it's evolved, and we've got to have freedom of speech and to address people as we always have done. And there's extremely serious work to be undertaken in councils. They manage so much of our lives, as you've alluded to. We've got to be able to get on with it.
Do you think that there's a massive element of selfishness when it comes to some people? We've had Brit Awards being changed as a result of someone not wanting to be a he anymore, and now we've had council business interrupted because someone felt offended about being misgendered. I mean, there will be people in that council ward who have got massive issues in their lives and probably would rather that was raised at council meetings. What right does this particular individual have to take the focus away from needy people?
They don't have the right, and I think that if you step up into public life, you've got to do that with a sense of public duty. So, I mean, there'll be people in that councillor's ward who've got, serious damp problems. There's social housing, there'll be antisocial behaviour, there'll be potholes, as you've said, there'll be major planning decisions, there'll be, low traffic zones coming in. When you step up into public life, you've got to take these things seriously and other people's problems seriously. So there isn't really place for that sort of self-indulgence, and it is selfishness. And so I think as a society, we've got to stand up to it and not begin indulging it.
OK, I mean, I worry that ship has sailed. What would you say to Danny Keeling, who's the councillor in question here, who decided to walk out and spit their dummy out as a result of somebody saying that? Oh, well, there we go. I believe our TV viewers will be able to see the individual there. So let that sink in. But what would you say to Danny Keeling, who left Newham Council after being misgendered?
I think, sorry if I'm being repetitive, I would say, listen, if you step up into public life, firstly, actually, I can add, you've got to be robust. We share this island, we've got to find ways to live together. We disagree about many things, so you step up into public life and you've got to be ready for robust debate. So you've got to be robust. And it's selfish to be, sort of self-indulgent like that. So have a really strong think about why you're there, whether you're there for yourself or whether you're there for other people. And, as a councillor, you're there for other people. And that's what you need to focus on.
It does indicate, doesn't it, something that I think is typical of wider society now, which is a lot of selfishness, a lot of self-obsession, and the idea now that the self trumps everything else. And not just that, but that everybody else has to make way for you. And if anyone thinks that there's something patently ridiculous about it, then they're wrong and they're the bigot and we're all the problem. But there we go. Caroline, thank you very much. I could talk to you all day, but we're out of time. Caroline Fetzler, who's a founder of Conservatives for Women and a former Conservative councillor. Yes, that clip, we will play that to you again before the end of the show. It is absolutely hilarious, isn't it? But up next, it turns out that Matt Hancock isn't a big fan of teaching unions, to say the least. He made a rather disparaging claim about them. We will debate his fruity comments after the break when, as I understand it, I might actually, at that particular point in the show, be allowed to say it. And is the countryside racist? You heard. That's what one Guardian writer has claimed. Let me know what you think. Loads of you have been doing. An unbelievable amount of you getting very worked up about whether or not you think that the countryside has too many white people in it and that something should be done about that. GBviews at gbnews.uk. I will see you in just a matter of seconds.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference. And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
It's 5 o'clock. We're live at 5. You're with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News, and lots to fit in this hour, so let's get cracking. We've got the latest round of explosive revelations from Matt Hancock's WhatsApp messages dropped by journalist Isabel Oakeshott in The Telegraph. Texts published as part of the lockdown files show now that Boris Johnson was worried the UK blinked too soon by going into a second national lockdown. Were we led into lockdown based on a fear about public opinion and not facts? But for his part, Hancock made an insulting comment about teaching unions, and we are going to debate that a little later on. I'm going to ask whether or not you think teaching unions are indeed human backsides. And the great British countryside, lush meadows, rolling hills, glorious landscapes. But did you actually know that it's racist? That's right, people think too many white people live in rural Britain, and something, goodness knows what that is, but something must be done about that. I'm asking, is the countryside racist? Get your emails coming in thick and fast. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Do you think Matt Hancock was betrayed? But I think maybe more interestingly, do you think the countryside is racist? gbviews@gbnews.uk. Right now, though, it's your headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Patrick, thanks very much indeed. Good evening to you. And our top story today on GB News, MI5's Director General says he's profoundly sorry that MI5 didn't prevent the attack following the inquiry into the Manchester Arena bombing. The report found the security service failed to act on intelligence received in the months before the attack, which happened in 2017. Information relating to suicide bomber Salman Abedi was assessed at the time as not terror-related. It also found he could have been arrested at Manchester Airport 4 days before he went on to kill 22 people at the Ariana Grande concert. The Home Secretary says she's committed now to working with MI5 and preventing another attack. A lawyer for the families spoke outside the inquiry, saying the victims had been failed at every level.
It is clear that Salman Abedi should have been referred to Prevent. It is clear that the education system needs to be more vigilant in picking up signs of radicalisation. It is clear that Didsbury Mosque turned a blind eye to extremism in its midst. Sir John's report today contains many lessons. We must heed every one of them and make the necessary changes urgently.
Well, in other news today, police investigating the death of a missing baby who was found in Brighton in Sussex last night say the newborn may have been dead for some time. The remains were found in Woodland, close to where Constance Martin and Mark Gordon were arrested on Monday. The couple had evaded authorities for more than 7 weeks and refused to give any information on the location or welfare of their baby. They're currently being held on suspicion of gross negligence manslaughter.
At this stage, we have not yet been able to confirm the baby's gender, and a post-mortem examination has not yet taken place. Despite this, based on our inquiries we've carried out so far, we believe, sadly, the baby may have been dead for some time before they were found. It's too early for us to provide a more specific date.
A Labour source has told GB News that Sue Gray has been hired as Sir Keir Starmer's new Chief of Staff. The senior civil servant led the investigation into Partygate. It's understood she'll resign her role in the Cabinet Office to take up the position in the Labour Party. The Downing Street spokesman says the resignation has been accepted with immediate effect. And John Swinney will step down as Deputy First Minister of Scotland. He'll leave the Scottish Government after working in Cabinet for almost 16 years, under both Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon. Mr Swinney is the longest serving in the role of Deputy First Minister, but he'll leave now with First Minister Nicola Sturgeon. Boris Johnson has expressed his concerns over Rishi Sunak's new Brexit deal for Northern Ireland. Speaking in Westminster, the former Prime Minister said he'd find it very difficult to vote for the Windsor Framework, saying it wasn't about the UK taking back control, rather. The deal with the EU aims to fix post-Brexit trade problems in Northern Ireland. Boris Johnson also admitting he'd made mistakes in signing his Northern Ireland Protocol that caused the DUP to walk out of power sharing.
I'm going to find it very difficult to vote for something like this myself, because I believed that we should have done something different. No matter how much plaster came off the ceiling in Brussels. And I hope that it will work. And I also hope that if it doesn't work, we will have the guts to deploy that bill again.
Matt Hancock says he's a victim of a massive betrayal after more than 100,000 of his WhatsApp messages were leaked. The former Health Secretary handed over his text to the journalist Isabel Oakeshott as they collaborated on his memoirs. She, though, passed them on to the Telegraph. The paper claims Mr Hancock clashed with the then Education Secretary Sir Gavin Williamson over schools during the COVID pandemic. Hancock reportedly said he was mounting rear-guard action to close schools in December 2020, despite Sir Gavin fighting tooth and nail to keep them open. Those are your latest news headlines. I'm back in half an hour. See you then.
OK, an eclectic mix for this final hour, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to try and hit it all. We've got the lockdown files. We're asking the bigger question as well as to whether or not Matt Hancock has been betrayed by virtue of these files, these WhatsApp messages getting out there. I'm going to be talking about a load of other topics as well. The countryside's been accused of being racist. How are we doing when it comes to tackling radical Islamist terrorism? There's all to go at this hour. We're going to start with the top story. As usual, would be weird if we did anything else. Matt Hancock and the government's handling of the COVID pandemic, because revelations so far include the former Health Secretary making a disparaging comment about teaching unions, Boris Johnson worrying that his government plunged the UK into a second lockdown too soon, and Gavin Williamson battling to keep schools open against pesky teachers who apparently, and I'm quoting now, just hate work. It's worth noting as well that Matt Hancock did also use a rather disparaging term to describe the unions. But the woman behind all of this is journalist Isabel Oakeshott, and she's defended leaking the WhatsApp exchanges referencing the national interest. She said, I did this because it's in the national interest. But Matt Hancock says he's hugely disappointed and sad at the massive betrayal and breach of trust by his ghostwriters. So, has Matt Hancock been betrayed? With me now to give his insights into all of this is Paul Baldwin, who is the head of comment at The Express and a man who has been traipsing the pavements of Fleet Street for generations. Paul, what's been going on here then? Do you think that Matt Hancock has got a right to feel betrayed?
Afternoon, Pat. Yeah, 100%. It goes without saying. Isabel Oakeshott, the journalist who co-wrote the not awfully best-selling book that Matt has just put on the shelves, signed a non-disclosure agreement, an NDA, specifically to prevent this happening And of course, she has done the exact opposite. So it's impossible to say he hasn't been betrayed. The bigger question for me is, what on earth was Matt Hancock doing getting in bed with the attractive blonde journalist Isabel Oakeshott in the first place?
Go on, expand on that for me. Do you think that it was, do you think, dare I say it, that you might have been a bit thick there?
Well, she has her USP as a journalist, her whole, her skill as a journalist is stiffing politicians. That's what she does. And she does it really well. And she's got a fantastic back catalogue. Who could forget in 2015, she released her biography on David Cameron.
Yeah.
And who could forget the story about David Cameron doing unspeakable things with a pig's head? Because it was a great tabloid news story. The truth of it, even Isabel is a bit sketchy about whether it actually happened or not. We'll never know. But I do quite like the way the Telegraph have called this whole thing the lockdown files, as in a kind of X-Files way. You know, the truth is out there. We're just not quite sure where it is at the moment.
Yes, it is. And now, although I can't believe I say this on national television, I have to say that David Cameron vehemently denies anything went on with a pig. So there we go.
Absolutely true.
And that's important to get that across to the nation, Paul. It would be a shame, obviously, if anyone thought otherwise. But, Paul, yes, so do you think that this is maybe a bad thing, though, in the round for journalism? Because people... Well, I was going to say don't trust us. They arguably don't anyway. But if anyone wants to go and have an autobiography written or tell a source something, it's supposed to be done on the basis of confidentiality and protecting sources. I mean, has Isabel Oakeshott actually broken one of the key tenets of journalism here?
She has, and again, she does have forum for this. Again, it hasn't come as a shock to any of us. I was briefly, back in the day, Isabel's boss at the Evening Standard. And I have to say that even back then, I mean, I was very much her boss. I was on the desk and she was kind of the most junior reporter. But I have to tell you, Pat, even then, she scared the pants off me. There's something about Isabel that makes her a very, very good journalist, a formidable journalist. But she seems kind of untroubled with the morality that the rest of us struggle with a little bit. As journalists, we all have a fluid grasp of morality, but kind of my line in the sand, and there's my line in the sand, which is right in front of me, and Isabel seems to be a long way off in the far distance somewhere, you know. She just seems untroubled. She's not immoral. She's not bad a person. She's kind of amoral. I felt this years ago. She just doesn't trouble herself so much with morality because there's a story to be got and she will get the story, and it makes her a very good journalist.
I suppose that in this sense as well, she could and probably would argue that she's maybe dealing with people here who also struggle with morality, i.e. the politicians involved here, and that she clearly did not feel as though the truth, or this particular version of the truth, would ever come out, and therefore it was justified in the public interest for us to know all of this information. If you as an editor, would you have run this?
Yes. I think her point about the public interest is valid. It's closer to the line than you might think, but it is valid. It's absolutely right and proper that the people who vote these people in know as much about them as we can. And if that means behind the scenes stuff, in fact, it really does mean behind the scenes stuff more than the kind of stage managed stuff that we get spoon fed, day after day. So I am with Isabel on that there really is a public interest offence here. The only thing is that at the end of the day, all we've discovered is that the government were headless chickens at the start of the COVID crisis. And we kind of knew that already, so it hasn't added a great deal. Bit of detail, and it has, but the bigger picture that we didn't know, the government didn't know any more than we did what was going on with this horrible COVID thing. It hasn't added much to that. But I think there is a public interest defence, and I'm sure if she has to, she will use it.
Yeah, look, Paul, thank you very, very much. Insightful stuff, that. Paul Baldwin, the head of comments at The Express, and it turns out it is possible to scare the pants off Paul Baldwin. Somehow it is, but there we go. Thank you very much. All right. All right, mate. Take care. Right, now, Matt Hancock has released a statement, and we can bring that to you now. He said, I am hugely disappointed and sad at the massive betrayal and breach of trust by Isabel Oakeshott. There is absolutely no public interest case for this huge breach. All the materials for the book have already been made available to the inquiry, which is the right and only place for everything to be considered properly and for the right lessons to be learned. I think I could memorise this now, I've read it so many times. As we have seen, releasing them in this way gives a partial, biased account to suit an anti-lockdown agenda. Thank you very much, Matt. Now, lots of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts on Matt Hancock saying he's a victim of a massive betrayal after 100,000 of his WhatsApp messages were leaked. Now, Don from Ringwood says, of course, this is a betrayal. If these texts were being hidden, then it would be in the public interest, but they weren't. It's a typical example of journalists feathering their own nest and creating an argument where none exists because it is still subject to an independent inquiry. I think the big question there is really, well, all right, Matt Hancock might have handed this stuff over to the inquiry. Would any of it have seen the light of day? Can you trust an inquiry? And bearing in mind, and this is from the other side of the coin, the story that's broken today, and I will be talking about this later when I cover for Dan Wootton, cheeky little plug, I'll be on 9 till 11, about Sue Gray, who was in charge of the inquiry into Partygate. Well, she's just gone and started work at the Labour Party, apparently. So actually, would you even trust that this particular bit wouldn't be covered up as well? Kevin from Folkestone says, is it really in the public interest to know that where there were disagreements at the highest level? They were dealing with the most difficult situation in modern times, and there was bound to be a conflict of opinion. I get that. I understand what you're saying. I will just add to that by saying that it does appear as well, though, that it wasn't just disagreements. They were being told that maybe the scientific data they were using was flawed and that possibly they'd jumped the gun when it came to actually putting us into a second lockdown, and they possibly shouldn't have done that. And so, essentially, were we being lied to? And was there a psychodrama playing on behind the scenes as to whether or not we should be sending the kids to school or not? Was it ego that was ruling policy as opposed to evidence? Can I just ask rather politely as well for you to email in, do you actually care about this Matt Hancock stuff? gbviews@gbnews.uk. Just purely because I've got a feeling that I'm going to end up having to talk about this quite possibly for days on end, and it would be nice for me to know whether or not you give a hoot. Connie says, Matt Hancock feels betrayed, poor thing. Well, guess what? We, the public, feel betrayed by him. Welcome to our world, Matt. OK, there we go. That's enough of that. Now, moving on, I do want to talk a lot about this particular story, because this actually opens up, I think, a really fascinating wider discussion about the way that we deal with or don't deal with terrorism in the community and the potential radicalisation of people at mosques. Now, the third and final report into the 2017 Manchester bombing has been released, and the inquiry found that the security service MI5 missed a significant chance to take action that might have prevented the attack, which killed 22 people. Now, speaking at the inquiry, Chairman Sir John Saunders stated that officers should have acted more quickly after information came in, but couldn't come to a conclusion as to whether this would have prevented the attack. Let's look and listen to this, shall we?
I have found a significant missed opportunity to take action that might have prevented the attack. It is not possible to reach any conclusion on the balance of probabilities or to any other evidential standard as to whether the attack would have been prevented. However, there was a realistic possibility that actionable intelligence could have been obtained which might have led to actions preventing the attack.
Right, so the mother of victim Martin Hett also spoke out following the findings of the report, and she said that more cohesion and communication between all emergency services would be needed to make sure nothing like this happens again. Now, this is the security elements of it. It's important to say that our secret services and our intelligence services keep us safe every single day, more times and in more ways than we will ever know. Of course, some things slip through the net, but when you have a look at the package of misgivings, really, about this particular individual, he went to Libya, he came back. Anyway, let's just listen to what she had to say now, and then we'll go into a wider discussion about all of this.
All 3 volumes point to an abundance of mistake and failures by a raft of different organisations, services and people. We need more cohesion and more communication between our services. We need a more efficient system in place to ensure the different pieces of the jigsaw come together. We are not here to point fingers. The bottom line is everyone who made mistakes, every service that was lacking on the night, every organisation who missed something in the lead-up to the attack is now aware of their failings.
OK, so undoubtedly there were security failings, and we know that because a bomb went off in an arena full of children and 22 people died. So, yes, clearly security failings. But there are also other failings here, and these are not being given, I would argue, as much prominence as maybe they should be. And in fact, some would say on the same day that Suella Braverman, our Home Secretary, has come out and said that political correctness is getting in the way of tackling radical Islam and, in fact, in some ways promoting it, on the same day as that, we are seeing evidence being given at an inquiry that Didsbury Mosque, which was attended by the arena bomber, was guilty of, quote, willful blindness to a highly charged debate about Libya. Now, they have said it's not an active cause in his radicalisation, but then the families and representatives of the families stood on the steps outside the inquest and really did hammer that particular mosque, saying what was going on in there was not right. What I am reading is a lot of headlines about mosque defends itself. And I just wonder whether or not that's a bit of a skewed way of looking at things. Of course, the mosque does defend itself. We're also hearing reports, and I'm reading some now, about the fact that the Manchester Arena inquiry claims that Salman Abedi, he's the bomber, that his family had significant responsibility for radicalisation. So we've got in the home and in the community here. Should that not be more of a concern for people? I do understand, of course, that there are security failings as well, but I'd be quite keen to drill down into why on earth this is happening almost at a cellular level, both in the family and in the community, and why more isn't being done about this, because I suspect that it's potentially down to people maybe being too afraid to actually raise things. But in the past hour, MI5 Director General Ken McCallum has said he is profoundly sorry that MI5 did not prevent the attack, adding that he deeply regrets that such intelligence was not obtained. Right, so we're going to park that there for a second or two because I have just been delivered some breaking news for you here, so let's have it, shall we? Confirmation of the confirmation of the breaking news. Does that make it double breaking news? I brought to you a little bit earlier. Labour say that Sir Keir Starmer is delighted that Sue Gray intends to take on the role of his Chief of Staff. Sue Gray led the inquiry into Partygate, and this is what's important. I actually genuinely can't believe this is happening. So Sue Gray led the inquiry into Partygate and clearly absolutely has hammered Boris Johnson and several other people who allegedly actually were hammered, which was part of the problem of Partygate, wasn't it? And it was confirmed today that she has resigned from her job in the Cabinet Office, and a Labour spokesman has now said that Labour has offered Sue Gray the role of Chief of Staff to the Leader of the Opposition. So Sue Gray could well now be Keir Starmer's Chief of Staff. They go on to say they understand she hopes to accept the role subject to the normal procedures. Oh, I wonder what they are. But, yes, I mean, is this right? Is this fair? Does this completely undermine Partygate? Does it completely undermine some of the reasons why Boris Johnson went? Does it completely undermine the attitude to Boris Johnson and show that, frankly, maybe there was a big left-wing Labour-backing core behind what was going on when it came to what Boris Johnson allegedly described as the greatest stitch-up since the Bayer Tapestry, which is, of course, Partygate. Do you think that should be allowed, that Sue Gray, who's fronted at Partygate, has now gone and supposedly, anyway, is going to be Chief of Staff for Sir Keir Starmer? I actually think that's quite a bad look for the Labour Party, but there we go. No doubt this will rumble on. That's the breaking news, that Sue Gray, who sounds like a librarian or maybe an assistant teacher, but was actually in the Cabinet Office, is now going to work for Labour. So there we go. Coming up, art classes, knitting and gardening probably aren't things that you'd want to be prescribed by the doctor, but activities like this could take the place of paracetamol and ibuprofen very soon. So if you've got a headache, OK, go out into your garden and do some gardening. But unless your garden's in the countryside, because if you were listening earlier, you will have learned that the countryside is now racist. Look, find out why next.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
OK, people, I've got loads coming your way. Apparently, the British countryside is not just a nice, peaceful place full of daffodils and whatever else. No, it is actually a hotbed of racism and something must be done about it. Yes, this is the latest interaction from The Guardian, who say that the countryside, essentially, is full of too many white people. Now, we've been asking you what you think about all of this, and lots of you have responded in kind. Patrick, the countryside is not racist. It's nice. People can choose to see racism anywhere if they want to, and that is from Keith. Thank you very much, Keith. The big questions around this was to whether or not accessibility of the countryside to people who are of ethnic minority demographics is indeed a thing. Well, I mean, a lot of people have taken to the inbox to point out that the countryside does tend to be quite a wide open space that people can walk in, and so accessibility shouldn't be too much of a problem there. But the other thing a lot of you have been emailing in about is Matt Hancock saying that he's a victim of a massive betrayal. 100,000 WhatsApp messages released. Diana thinks he has been. He's been betrayed big time, she says, although I don't believe that she's done it for the sake of the country. She's just a self-serving, untrustworthy individual. It's strong stuff, that. Isabel Oakeshott, of course, saying that she's done it for the public interest. Bob says, rightly or wrongly, how she might view Hancock. She should not have disclosed private messages. I'm going to get a few of your responses before I go to a guest in a second on the breaking news that we just brought you, which is that the Labour Party's new chief of staff is apparently Sue Gray. And you might remember that name because Sue Gray is off of Partygate, isn't she? Boris Johnson did describe it as the greatest stitch-up since the Bayer Tapestry. Well, how do you feel about the fact that the lady behind that has just jumped ship and gone to the Labour Party? Do you not think that casts the whole thing into doubt? Does this not mean that Boris Johnson maybe has a case now to think, well, was this whole report against me actually quite biased from the start? Was it done by someone who has an allegiance to the Labour Party? Sue Gray, of course, yet to respond, so we'll have to get more information on all of that. A lot of you very angry about it, though. A lot of you very, very angry about it. That so-called civil servant, Sue Gray, Christine thinks she's a traitor, which, of course, Sue Gray, one would imagine, would vehemently deny. She should be shunned by everyone in politics. Gosh, Christine is casting Sue Gray out. I really like the fact that Sue Gray has got such a normal-sounding name. And I think that makes it quite innocent, really, doesn't it? But there we go. Yes, like I said, so I'm going to be talking about the breaking news. I'm going to be talking about whether or not the countryside is racist. And I'm also going to be talking about the very latest when it comes to Matt Hancock and, indeed, these lockdown files. A lot of people A lot of people getting in touch about that. Is he right to criticise the teaching unions as well? This is the other thing, because basically Matt Hancock and Gavin Williamson, between them, managed to call the teaching unions quite rude names and say that they were work shy. Now, I wonder whether or not there's any truth in that, and get your views coming in before we have a debate on this, because was there, do you think, a case that the teachers actually had it really good during the pandemic? The unions seemed to get what they wanted, which was for the kids to stay out of school. From where I'm sitting, they then got to not really do their exams. The teachers could mark their own homework, so they could basically give the kids the grades, and then they presumably got to hit their targets. And then now they're out on picket lines saying, can we have a pay rise for how hard we worked during the pandemic? I'm not sure that makes too much sense. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Make sure you keep all of those coming in. Sue Gray's popping up again in the inbox. It's a foregone conclusion that Boris was hung out to dry by Sue Gray. It's inevitable that Harriet Harman will do the same. Good grief. Yes, so lots of you, of course, very, very angry about that breaking news that we just brought you, which is that Sue Gray has indeed now decided to go and join the Labour Party. Well, look, like I said, when we come back, we're going to delve into the world of whether or not teaching unions are indeed, it's a word beginning with A, which I will reserve for after the news headlines, and whether or not they're lazy, because that appears to be what Matt Hancock and Gavin Williamson have said. I'm also going to be returning to that story about whether or not the countryside is actually racist. Do you think that it is? Should more be done to try to entice people of ethnic minority backgrounds into the countryside? Or is it just, and hear me out on this, people, could it possibly just be that in the latest census, 82% of the population happens to be white, and in rural areas there happens to be fewer ethnic minority communities? Dare I say it, could that just be the reason why the countryside is majority white? We're going to talk about all of this in just a matter of moments. But first, I can whiz you over now to your latest headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
At 5:30, these are the latest news headlines from the GB newsroom. And MI5 Director General says he is profoundly sorry that his security agency did not prevent the attack following the inquiry into the Manchester Arena bombing. The report found the security service failed to act on information relating to the suicide bomber Salman Abedi, which at the time was not assessed as terror-related. It also found Abedi could have been arrested at Manchester Airport just 4 days before he went on to kill 22 people at the Ariana Grande concert. Security Minister Tom Tugendhat says MI5 has made changes since the attack.
I know that all of us are working to make sure that the improvements that need to be made are made. Already more than 100 changes have been done, and no doubt this report will highlight others. The Home Secretary and I support MI5 in making those changes.
And police investigating the death of a missing baby who was found in Brighton in Sussex last night say the newborn may have been dead for some time. The remains were found in woodland, close to where Constance Martin and Mark Gordon were arrested on Monday. The couple had evaded the authorities for more than 7 weeks and refused to give any information on the location or welfare of their baby. They're currently being held on suspicion of gross neglect manslaughter. A Labour source has told GB News that Sue Gray has been hired as Sir Keir Starmer's Chief of Staff. As you've been hearing, the senior civil servant led the investigation into Partygate. It's understood she'll resign her role in the Cabinet Office to take up the position in the Labour Party. A Downing Street spokesman says the resignation has been accepted with immediate effect. Those are your latest news headlines. I'm back in half an hour. See you then.
OK, people, it's very nearly the moment that I certainly have been waiting for, because the lockdown files have revealed that Matt Hancock and Gavin Williamson used choice language to describe teaching unions. They called them arses, and I'm going to be having a debate as to whether or not indeed they are. Don't go anywhere.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island's story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236,
And YouView, Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Now, a warning that Matt Hancock and Gavin Williamson are not the biggest fans of teaching unions, apparently, and that some choice language was used to describe them, with the former Health Secretary calling them absolute arses. Teachers are furious, but, you know, and so Gavin laid into them even further. According to him, they just hate to work. As teachers go out on strike this month, demanding fully funded pay rises, I'm asking, are teaching unions indeed arses? With me now is Socialist Party industrial organiser and trade unionist Rob Williams and political commentator Peter Barnes. Thank you very much. Peter, are teachers' unions arses?
No, I don't think they are, but I do rather enjoy this great moralising that's coming out of trade unions and teachers at the moment. It's just, are you telling me that trade unions have said nothing disparaging about Gavin Williamson or Matt Hancock in this entire kerfuffle that's been going on? It's just one of these stories where it's all being blown out of proportion because everybody likes to think they're a nicer person than they really are. And that's, for me, that's all this is.
I'll throw it over to you. You are indeed a trade unionist, Rob. You an arse?
Well, as for others to decide. I mean, listen, Sir Gavin Williamson and Matt Hancock, I mean, honestly, I think parents will be looking at those two and they will be looking at their teachers. I tell you what, I know who parents will be supporting and who parents trust. The issue here isn't it, it's not so much these comments are bad enough, shows, I think, what they really think. The issue is that teachers and other public sector, well, we're all workers. It's the contempt and disrespect they've been shown by the government in the cost of living squeeze. That's the issue, isn't it?
OK, well, does this show do you think, Peter, a contempt for teachers' unions? Because I suppose Gavin Williamson would argue he was desperate to try to keep the schools open, and he clearly felt there was some self-serving resistance there.
Yeah, I think there's a point to that, but we also have to remember that these WhatsApps happened within a context. They happened within COVID, and obviously there's loads of pressure on both sides of this. And obviously people say things in WhatsApp messages that they don't expect to be leaked to the press. And and everybody has frustrations, and so people just like to vent. And these comments just be taken completely out of context again. And like I say, it's this great moralising, and I'd love to see some of the WhatsApps of the teachers' unions and see whether anything disparaging has been said in there, because I bet there has been. And it's just one of those things that, yeah, parents might be annoyed with Matt Hancock and Sir Gavin Williamson, but let's also be honest that, support for teachers' unions is up and down all the time. So it's one of those swings and roundabout things, I think.
Rob, if I went through your phone now, would I find I shudder to think what you call me, I mean, I wouldn't like to read that, would I? Is it just WhatsApp messages? It doesn't really matter, heat of the moment stuff?
No, but look, let's put that aside. Let's look at the context, because the context is right. What was taking place at that time was that teachers, don't forget, teachers did work through COVID. The schools stayed open because it was deemed essential to keep key workers in work. And the only way that they could do that... Let me just finish this point. Look, the point they're making was that those teachers did stay in work, or at least a significant number of them, and they risked their lives. Some of them lost their lives. And of course, not just teachers, but other public sector workers. So, look, we all know the catastrophic way this government dealt with COVID. We know about the way that some of them bent, disobeyed the rules that were set on COVID. But actually, the people they attack are the workers who are in the front line.
OK, I'll let you come back on that then, Peter. I mean, do you think that, in light of the fact that teachers, I suppose, teachers' unions, let's qualify that, were reluctant, I think it's fair to say, to get the schools open, exams, for example, didn't particularly take place, and now we do appear to see teachers out on strike wanting more money for their efforts during the coronavirus crisis. Do you have sympathy for what Matt Hancock and Gavin Williamson were saying?
I have to admit, it is one of those things. I think teachers did a great job throughout COVID. I think everybody tried the best that they could. Like you said, there's lots of different public sector workers and lots of people, even the private sector as well, that are often overlooked that had to continue to work throughout COVID. So it's one of those things where you're saying put their lives at risk. A lot of people put their lives at risk. This isn't a unique thing. And it's also, I think you just made a really important point, a distinction between comments about the trade union and comment about teachers themselves. This is a really important distinction that, it's not like he's had to go at every single teacher. He's talking about trade unions and their kind of rather staunch opposition, or at least their unwillingness at times to work constructively with the government, which we've seen, whether it be any kind of medical trade union or the teachers' union or any union at the moment. There is the pushback is the automatic response, and there's been a somewhat of a lack of constructive working together, I think.
OK, I do think we're going to have to wrap this up now, but Rob, I do think that you make it quite a good point, actually, which is that the idea that Gavin Williamson and Matt Hancock would in any way have come across as inherently more likeable than the trade unionists. It's a tough pick, isn't it, to see, no matter which side of the political fence you're on, to see who you'd actually prefer to spend a bit of time with there. But look, thank you very much, both of you, and I appreciate the good-natured way in which that debate was done as well, and apologies, Rob, for my loaded question earlier. Socialist Party industrial organiser and trade unionist Rob Williams and political commentator Peter Bars. Now, Matt Hancock has released a statement which, yes, I think I could probably recite from memory now. I've read it that often, but he said, "I'm hugely disappointed and sad at a massive betrayal and breach of trust by Isabel Oakeshott. There is absolutely no public interest case for this huge breach. All the materials for the book have already been made available to the inquiry, which is the right and only place for everything to be considered properly and the right lessons to be learned. Good grief. As we have seen, releasing them in this way is partial, biased account to suit an anti-lockdown agenda. Thank you very much, Matt." Now, is our countryside a racist enclave? Some campaigners seem to think so. Activists say that more must be done to open up public spaces to those of different backgrounds or ethnicity. I struggle to get that, because the countryside, by definition, is an open space, but are people genuinely excluded? outside of Britain's urban areas? And should we paint all village dwellers with the same big racist brush? With me now is Gareth Wyn-Jones, a Welsh farmer. Gareth, thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. I can see you are clearly standing somewhere deeply racist now, because you are in the countryside. Gareth, is the countryside racist?
Gosh, no, by a long way. Not racist at all, you know. It's fantastic to get people out. If you just go down the road here, a place called Abergwyngregin. It's a beautiful area. People come from all over the country to visit it. It's got a lovely waterfall. And, you know, a lot of the people we meet there and go up onto the mountain gates, a lot of them are Asian, and they love coming to that area, and they keep coming back. If you go into Bangor itself, you know, a university city, and a lot of the people then travel into the countryside to enjoy it. So I don't know where some of these people get these ideas from, you know. Well, I think it's just, very left-wing, wokish, bloody joke, to be honest with you.
Right. I'll tell you next time, say what you really think, Gareth. But just on this, people are saying, this is an article that's been published again today, which is that because the vast majority of people in the countryside who live there are white, that is in some way a problem and it can make people feel uncomfortable. How would you respond to that?
Well, I don't want to use the word, but it starts with bull and it finishes with something else. So we have immersive tours up here. Immersive tours. People come from all over the world, all religions, all ethnicities. They come up here to visit our farm. My family's been on this farm 375 years. You know, this is what we have been doing all our lives. And without these people, you know, that come and visit and come and buy our food, at the end of the day, farmers, you know, and a lot of people are in the countryside depend on these people, because they're the ones that pay our bills, because they're the ones that are buying our beef, our lamb, our vegetables, our fruits, you know, everything that we produce in the countryside, that's been bought by our consumers and customers, and they'll be from every single race. So I really think it's rubbish, to be honest with you. And if you go on a lot of these farms, there'll be different people from different parts of the world working there as well. And it really winds me up. It really winds me up. You know, am I to be blamed that I'm white? My family's been on this land all its life.
One thing that gets me, Gareth, is the idea that in some way people are being priced out of living in the country. And I think a lot of people have this image of the fact that everyone who lives in the countryside has got this massive plot of land and that actually there's a big house on that and that they're very, very wealthy. Now, whilst there might be a big plot of land and there might be quite a big house, the fact is, Gareth, that rural poverty is a thing, isn't it? So the notion that someone might be priced out of either just getting to the countryside or living there, for example, is not really true, is it?
No, and farmers have had to diversify into tourism, you know, into putting caravans or glamping pods onto their farms so they can make a living, you know, and we need people to come and visit and spend money, or we're dead in the water, literally. A lot of farmers are very asset rich, you know, and they'll have a lot of land that's worth a lot of money, but they can never sell that. Well, they can do if they just want to give up the job or get out of the job. But if they're always thinking of the next generation, you know, we have to look after it. One of the things our family has always said, you know, that when we have this land and when we pass it on, we're passing it on in a better way than what we're giving it. And that's really important in the countryside. So when we bring these people onto these farms, onto our farms, immersive tourism, they go in a way with an understanding of what we do here. And it's really, really important that, you know, that we're not classed as racist, because that's what these people are trying to do. They're trying to divide. They should divide the countryside and town folks. And that's not right. We need to build better bridges so people have an understanding of how food's produced, seasonality, bringing them back into the circle of food production. And, you know, it's beginning to look like spring here. It's warm, the sun's setting, and it's beautiful. And I know my tourism season is just about to start. I'm so excited to be having people from all over the world here for another summer of magic.
Absolutely. Oh, you've sold it. Fantastic stuff. Gareth, thank you very much. Gareth Wyn-Jones there, who is, of course, a Welsh farmer. And just quickly, Gareth, sorry, where did you say that local place was around the corner from you there in Wales, the name of it?
Abergwyn-Gregin.
And is that just spelt the usual way, is it?
Yeah, or you can try Llanfair Pwll Gwyngyll, Gogeryll, Llwyn Drobwell, Llantysiliog, Gogagoch. That's only about 15 miles from here. Beautiful place.
Oh, well, I'll pop it in the sat-nav. Thank you very much, Gareth. Great stuff. Right, OK, lots of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts on senior civil servant Sue Gray, who investigated COVID lockdown gatherings in Downing Street. Now, Sue has resigned and has been offered the job of Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer's chief of staff, believe it or not. Well, Lynn says, well, if we needed confirmation that Boris was set up, this is it. No good saying she was an impartial investigator when it's clear that she was batting for Labour all the time. Even her son is the chair of 2 Labour organisations. Well, that's interesting. We'll obviously have to look into that, Lynn, but we'll take your word for it at this stage. Anyway, yeah, so if you are just joining us, this is the woman who was behind the Partygate investigation. Boris Johnson, as I've said, claimed that it was the greatest stitch-up since the Bayer Tapestry, which is a fantastic line from Bojo there. But he went. Loads of people went. People, were disgraced, etc. How dare you? All this big public thing. Well, how does it turn out now that the lady who was behind that report is off to be the chief of staff at the Labour Party? Does that not maybe undermine certain things? How was that investigation, by the way, into Keir Starmer having a Calmer and a beer in Durham? But Colin says, it seems strange that it now appears a Labour supporter found the Tory leader guilty of an independent inquiry. Now, Sue Gray, for what it's worth, was in the civil service, essentially. She will, I imagine, claim that she was neutral and everything. Does it mean that she's now nailing her political colours to the mast? Or is she going to say, well, actually, I can do a job as a chief of staff just simply as a job. My political allegiances don't matter. But it looks very fishy, doesn't it? Mike says she was a senior civil servant asked by Boris Johnson to investigate Partygate. She wrote a report based on evidence available. End of. She's left Cabinet Office after resigning, so has every right to take whatever job she wants or is offered. The job as Keir Starmer's chief of staff is subject to approval by the advisory committee. Well, obviously they're going to approve it, aren't they? Are you the lady who knows exactly where all of the bodies are buried when it comes to Partygate? Yeah, come on in, please. David says, I can't see what the issue is. She was asked to investigate Partygate after the event by then Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Yes, they're very much two sides to that particular coin. OK, let's get back now to a story that I covered in the last hour. Now, this is interesting. So a Green Party councillor walked out of an important council meeting after he was repeatedly misgendered. Now, Danny Keeling, who uses the pronouns they and them, was very unhappy when Newham Council Chairman Winston Vaughan misgendered them, and so walked off. But unfortunately, when Vaughan apologised, he still couldn't get it right, and I happen to personally think this is quite funny. Here's what happened. We've got, I believe we've got a video, have we, of this, bungled apology.
I'm misrepresenting the councillors' name. I should have said them rather than he. So I do apologise for that. And I think that's what's affected him, is it? It's there. That's... Yes, so my apologies to him for misquoting. Okay. For them, sorry. Thank you very much.
Right, well, there we go. So that is basically the bungled apology, isn't it? But what is actually fascinating is that we, of course, we played that in the last hour, and we decided that we were just going to have a quick look through the inbox. And I had an email in here, and it appears to be from the man himself, Danny Keeling, and it appears to be from an official email address. So clearly, this particular chap was watching the show and has decided to get in touch. That's him, in case you wanted to, or them. It's hard to tell, isn't it? It is. You wouldn't know, would you? You just wouldn't know. He says, unsure why my story is so important here, but I did wish to add some context that the chair outside of these meetings has a history of being disrespectful, and also the borough I represent, according to the ONS, has the most amount of transgender residents. He does go on. It's LGBT History Month and et cetera, et cetera. So there we go. All right. So Danny has had his say. Thank you very much for getting in touch, Danny. And you are, of course, welcome to come on the show if you so wish. Now, next up is Jubes & Co. with the wonderful Michelle Juby. And Michelle, normally we rush this, but I'm told that we've got a couple of minutes here.
Oh, well, good job I've sat down then with a nice warm drink. Then
Yes.
I've got myself comfortable and cosy.
Indeed. Now, are you going to bother to tell us what's coming up, or are you going to basically say that we've got to find
I'm going
out?
to say the same thing to you as what I always say, which is if you want to know what's going on in the best debate programme on television, you've got to tune in and watch it.
Yes, absolutely. OK,
That's what
all
I
right.
say.
What do you make of that particular individual, the bungled apology as someone being misgendered and then them walking out? Because people are saying, well, hasn't that council got potholes to fix, rising damp in people's houses, poverty, bins that need collecting? Why are they even talking about this?
Well, I'm not a massive fan of compelled speech, I have to say. If somebody wants to take a common word that most people would associate as plural, as a collective, and apply it to themselves, that is their choice. It is a free country. But when you start saying that, you know, you have to call me this and otherwise I want apologies and all the rest of it, I think that's a stretch too far. Although I have to say, I've got a little boy that's got long hair, right? And I lose track of how many times people will say to me, I don't know, we're in a playground waiting to go on the slide, and someone will say, oh, it's OK, we'll let her go down first, or, you know, do you want your little girl to go there? And I'm like, it's a boy, it's a boy.
Do you tell them straight away, or do you actually take advantage of it? Because that way, if you did decide to correct them, you are denying your son the chance to go first down the slide.
Well, no, my son is a very polite boy, and he knows you have to wait your turn. We don't push in based on genders in my household. I can tell you, we don't get female preference or anything. But yeah, he's just got really long hair, and everyone does think he's a girl. And by the way, boys can have long hair too, by the way. Although if I had my way, it'd be down his backside, which is probably a bit much. Anyway, I was listening to your racism conversation earlier.
I'm glad you qualified that. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, I mean, come on now.
We've got 3 seconds.
Oh, I've only got 3 seconds.
Yeah, tune in. I'll be back for Dan Watson later on. See you at 9. Bye.
Goodbye.
Afternoon, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Most will have a dry day again tomorrow. Brighter day across much of the north, whereas in the south, after quite a bit of sunshine today, it will be cloudier. We've got this large area of high pressure continuing to dominate our weather. As I said, keeping most places dry, but with the breeze coming in from the east, we have seen a few showers coming into parts of southern Scotland, and the chance of 1 or 2 still through the central belt and across southern Scotland into the evening. But they should be fading, I think, generally overnight. The odd one for the east of Northern Ireland as well. But most places dry. Clearer skies in West Wales, southwest England, and across much of northern Scotland will allow a frost. Most towns and cities, and where it's cloudy, will stay above freezing. But nevertheless, quite a chilly feel on Friday morning with a rather drab start for sure. Bit of a breeze blowing across Kent, and the breeze picking up across the Northern Isles, where there may be a few showers from late morning onwards. The cloud thick enough over the Midlands and eastern England, maybe for the odd light shower, but generally it'll be dry. Some sunny spells developing here, and generally a sunny day across much of central and northern Scotland too. Temperatures around or even a touch below average. In the sunshine, it won't feel too bad at all, but where it's grey, again, quite a cold feel, and particularly with the breeze on some of these eastern coasts. I think as we go through Friday evening, we'll see the cloud breaking up a little bit more, so we'll see a few more places getting down to freezing as we head into the weekend. So Saturday morning, starting with a frost, certainly across a good part of Scotland, northern England. Generally, again, a lot of cloud across the south, but we should see some sunny spells over western parts of Scotland, northwest England, and down to the southwest as well. But overall, cloudy, and a few more showers coming in, perhaps to the east of England, certainly across northeast Scotland during Saturday. But apart from that, most of the weekend looking dry, but it is going to turn colder, especially next week, when there is the possibility of some snow.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the people's channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
is the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel. Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one.
Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like
Absolutely.
on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView, Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's 6 o'clock. I'm Michelle Dewberry, and this is Jubes and Co. Lots to get into tonight. The MI5 has basically come in for huge criticism because you will be aware that the investigation Manchester Arena, it's produced its final slot today, and get this everyone, significant opportunities were missed apparently when it comes to stopping that attack. You know the drill. You know what they say, lessons will be learned. But really, will they? Do you trust, actually, that lessons will be learned, that things like this will never happen again? And Sue Gray, do you remember her from Partygate? Well, she has now been offered the job of Chief of Staff to Sir Keir Starmer. Many people up in arms saying that this demonstrates civil service is not impartial, does it? Or is it just someone changing jobs, as many of us do daily? Your thoughts? And do you have a pet? A cat, for example? Would you kill it to stop the spread of COVID-19? Goodness gracious me. That was actually a serious suggestion that was considered by the government at one point during the pandemic. Can you imagine? I mean, it all got out of hand, didn't it? That is today's instalment of the Lockdown Diaries. And Lee Anderson says that poor people basically are not as resourceful as they used to be. Is he right? That has divided opinion for sure. We'll have it all to come, but first up, let's get ourselves up to speed, shall we, with tonight's latest headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Michelle, thank you, and good evening to you. Our top story on GB News tonight. MI5's Director General says he is profoundly sorry that the security agency did not prevent the Manchester Arena bombing following the inquiry into the attack. The report found the security service failed to act on critical intelligence relating to the suicide bomber Salman Abedi. It also found he could have been arrested at Manchester Airport 4 days before he went on to kill 22 people at the Ariana Grande concert. A lawyer for the family spoke outside the inquiry saying the victims had been failed at every level.
It is clear that Salman Abedi should have been referred to prevent. It is clear that the education system needs to be more vigilant in picking up signs of radicalisation.